Chapter 2133. Obviously, she couldn't. Enchanting wouldn't accept it. She couldn't accept it. Staring at Enchanting and above her head, Enchanting wanted to get angry, but she couldn't. It was as if there was another consciousness in her heart that was preventing her from getting angry with him. This feeling came suddenly and inexplicably, and Enchanting felt suffocated. She stood up, but her head still hurt. Enchanting saw her look and stepped closer. He didn't show any emotion on his face and said softly, "I can't make it up." Enchanting looked up at him with anger in her eyes. Unexpectedly, Enchanting took a step forward and stood in front of her. "But I still have to make it up," Enchanting looked at her and said, "I'm trying my best, whether I can make it up or not." Enchanting looked at Enchanting and in front of her and felt familiar yet strange. Was Enchanting like this? That's not it. Enchanting wasn't like this. Besides, Enchanting said again and stared deeply into Enchanting's eyes with a pair of amber eyes, "I'm not just giving you material things." Enchanting was forced to take a step back under his gaze. Enchanting took another step forward and said slowly, "I'm also giving you my heart." Enchanting felt uncomfortable all over and took another step back. Unexpectedly, Enchanting reached out and held her hand. Enchanting was shocked. Before she could react, Enchanting held her hand and pressed it to his heart. "Here, it's beating for you." It was obviously a normal body temperature, a normal warmth. Enchanting felt inexplicably scorching. Enchanting immediately withdrew her hand. She pretended to be frightened and shouted, "Enchanting, are you crazy?" His words made her so disgusted that she had goosebumps all over her body. How could such words come out of Enchanting's mouth? "Yes, I'm crazy," Enchanting said calmly. Enchanting replied calmly, "I almost went crazy when you got into that car accident 2 years ago." 2 years ago, Enchanting was in a trance when she heard this. "I've always regretted it," Enchanting said as he held her hand. "If I had reflected on myself and not pushed you so hard, or if my temper had been a little better, would things have turned out differently?" Enchanting shuddered and said, I've been waiting for you to wake up for the past 2 years," Enchanting interrupted her. "You were bedridden for 2 years. You were in a vegetative state for 2 years. Do you know that?" Enchanting widened her eyes and looked at Enchanting in disbelief. She was in a vegetative state for 2 years. How could she possibly know? "I'm really afraid that you'll never wake up." Enchanting took another step forward and forced her into a corner. "Little Moon is still so young. He needs his mother." Enchanting didn't know what to say. She stared blankly at Enchanting. There was a faint smell of tobacco on his body, but it wasn't unpleasant. It seemed that he was used to it, so he didn't feel any disgust. On the contrary, she felt that his scent made her feel very safe. Enchanting looked away, and her heart wavered for a moment. He wore a simple shirt and stood straight. He looked thin and gentle. However, there was an unconcealable tiredness in his eyes and a strong sense of affection. Chapter 2134. Enchanting covered her face with his palm. His eyes were gentle, and he seemed to be different from the manic and immoral man in her memory. Enchanting shrank back and reached out to grab his hand that was caressing her cheek. Enchanting took the opportunity to hold her hand and said softly, "Believe me, every word I'm saying now is true." His words were full of sincerity. Enchanting found them familiar. It was as if Enchanting had said them before she knew it. Every word automatically overlapped in her mind. There was a shadow in her mind that overlapped with Enchanting in front of her. Enchanting's affectionate look made Enchanting's mind a mess. Enchanting's head hurt even more. She frowned and lowered her head. Shenluo An, my head hurts. Shenluo An's eyes flashed and he said, go lie down for a while. As he spoke, he picked her up without hesitation. Shenmanting screamed and immediately hugged Shenluo An's neck. She steadied herself and looked sideways at Shenluo An's handsome face. She closed her eyes and felt dizzy. Shenmanting was placed on the bed and soon closed her eyes. Shenluo An sat beside her in silence. His heart felt like it had been knocked over. It was very complicated. I know you have always hated me. Shenluo An's back was facing her. He put his elbows on his legs and covered his face. His voice was a little muffled. He said, but 2 or 3 years have passed. Manting, we still have to live our lives. I want to make it up to you. Can you give me a chance? Give him a chance and give her a chance too. After Shenluo An's voice fell, there was a long silence in the room. After more than 10 seconds, there was a faint sob behind him. Shenluo An froze slightly and turned to look. Shenmanting grabbed the quilt and her eyes were full of tears. She looked at Shenluo An with a pitiful face and pouted. Honey, Shenluo An's head was throbbing. Shenmanting rushed to Shenluo An and said, honey, who were you talking to just now? Shenluo An pulled her into his arms and whispered, with you. No, you're not talking to me. Shenmanting whimpered, you never talk to me like that. You're talking to someone else, aren't you? Little Shenmanting's mental age was only 12 years old. But as an orphan, she was more sensitive than most adults in certain aspects. Shenluo An held her in his arms. His heart ached when he heard her words. He hugged her gently and lowered his head to kiss away the tears at the corner of her eyes. He whispered, Manting, I'm talking to my Manting. Hubby, Shenmanting hugged him and buried her face in his chest. There's another Manting, isn't there? Shenluo An was stunned and didn't know how to answer. Hubby, that Manting isn't me. I'm Manting. Don't like that Manting, okay? Shenmanting hugged him and looked at him pleadingly. That Manting wants to hate you. She doesn't want to be with you. She said that you're a bad person. I told her that you're not, but she didn't believe me. Shenluo An fell silent. Chapter 2135. Shenmanting's eyes were fixed on Shenluo An as she spoke. She felt wronged when she saw that he was getting quieter and quieter. She couldn't help but hold Shenluo An tighter and burst into tears. Why aren't you talking? Do you like Shenmanting more and don't want me anymore? Shenmanting hugged him with all her strength and cried uncontrollably, Honey, honey, I'm the one who likes you, not that person. Don't like her, okay? Shenluo An's heart ached when he heard her crying. Her uneasiness and fear were clear to him. Shenluo An hesitated for a moment and hugged her tightly in his arms. He said softly, Don't be silly. I love Manting, and I always have. Don't cry, or you won't look good. No, no. Shenmanting was very persistent. She hugged him and shouted, You know it's not me. I'm not her, and she's not me. I know, she hates you, and you also know that she hates you. Why can't you only like me? Her voice was intermittent with a sobbing tone. Every word was poking at Shenluo An's heart. Yes, Shenmanting hated him. Even little Manting knew that. Why was he still so persistent? Perhaps it was because, to him, whether it was the original Shenmanting or the 12-year-old Hyunsuin, they were the same person. Shenmanting cried even harder when she saw that Shenluo An did not speak again. She looked up at the man in front of her, and her little face was already red from crying. She looked at the man in front of her and pulled out her hand to hold his face. Shenmanting directly kissed his lips and clumsily and hurriedly kissed him. Shenluo and did not refuse, nor did he respond. He looked at her calmly, and his heart was a little complicated. Shenmanting burst into tears and said, "She hates it when I do this to you. She doesn't want me to do this." Then she put her hands around his neck and said, "But I like it so much. I like it when you kiss me. Can you kiss me again and hug me again?" Shenluo and heard her words and pursed his lips. Shenmanting's body trembled and she sniffed and pretended to cry again. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Looking at him like a child, she said, "Hubby, why aren't you talking? Why aren't you answering me?" He reached out and gently wiped away the tears on her face. "To me, you are Shenmanting, and Shenmanting is you. I can't treat you as two different people. Manting, you're the mother of my child, and you're my wife," he said softly. "No." Shenmanting mumbled. "She's not your wife. I'm your wife. I love you. She doesn't love you." "Don't be fooled." Shenluo An's heart was pierced once again. Shenmanting sobbed. She grabbed his hand and said, "I was the one who put this ring on you. I'll put it on for you again at the wedding next month. As long as you don't want Shenmanting to come back, I can continue to stay by your side. Hubby, I beg you, please love me, okay?" Shenluo An was taken aback. "What do you mean?" Chapter 2136. His words were clear and organized. Shenmanting sobbed a little, but she remained calm. She stared into his eyes, as if waiting for his decision. Shenluo An was still in a daze and found it hard to believe. In other words, it was a choice between two personalities. If he had chosen the original Manting, little Manting would have been obliterated. What if it was the other way around? If he chose young Manting, then the original Manting, would she never be able to come back? However, Shenmanting was still very serious when she said those words. He had always thought that little Manting was innocent and kind. But in the face of such a moment, she could still be so firm and decisive. That's right, in a moment of life and death like this, everyone wanted to survive. This is human nature. Shenluo An stared at Shenmanting for a long time, then muttered, "Must it be like this?" Shenmanting saw his hesitation, and tears rolled down her cheeks again. She looked at Shenluo An and said, "Hubby, do you like her more?" His voice was choked with sobs, filled with confusion and despair. She tugged at Shenluo An's clothes and sniffed. "Why? Honey, why?" Little Manting was very puzzled. "I'm the one who loves you. I'm the one who likes you. You like me too. Why did you choose someone else?" Even the door couldn't block out the cries of despair. Yi Qianqian couldn't stand it anymore. She handed Little Moon over to Nanny He and quietly walked to the door of the room to observe what was going on inside. The door was ajar, but it just so happened that it covered the position of the bed. The voice came from the bed. Yi Qianqian stretched out her hand to knock on the door. At that moment, she clearly heard Shenluo An's voice again. Shenluo An's voice was a little soft, perhaps because he was quite a distance away from her. He said, "I didn't make a choice. To me, Manting is Manting. Manting, be a good girl and don't cry." "No." Shenmanting screamed in a hoarse voice. "I'm not. Hubby, you know I'm not." Shenluo An fell silent. Shenmanting's sobbing filled the room. She couldn't stand it any longer. She turned around and picked up her phone to call Shenjilie. Shenjilie seemed to be busy. No one picked up the phone. After thinking for a moment, he knocked on the door and said, "Big brother, big sister-in-law." Shenmanting's crying subsided a little. "Come in," Shenluo An said. When Yi Qianqian heard that, her hair stood on end. She had been married to Shinjilia for 2 years, and this was her first time entering Shinluo An's room. As soon as he walked in, he discovered that Shinluo An's room was very large. When she walked in, she saw Shinluo An sitting on the bed and Shinmanting lying on it. Shinmanting's eyes were red and swollen, and she looked very pitiful. Yi Qianqian's heart ached. At the same time, she was a little afraid. The person in front of her was schizophrenic. What if she took it too hard and stabbed her? I heard that the emotions of mental patients are very unstable, cough cough. Yi Qianqian walked over and said sheepishly, Manting, didn't you say that you wanted to take the baby to the amusement park? Little Moon is already urging you to go. Chapter 2137. Wow, he's quite organized. Yi Qianqian thought to herself. She quickly stepped forward and said, Then you have to apologize to Little Moon. As an adult, you have to set a good example. Shinmanting wiped her face and asked, Are my eyes swollen? Yi Qianqian nodded subconsciously, but immediately shook her head. They're just a little red. Shinmanting got out of bed, put on her slippers, and walked out. Shinluo An's face was gloomy. He looked at Shinmanting's back and said softly, Thank you. It was obvious that he was thanking Yi Qianqian. Yi Qianqian waved her hand and said, There's no need to thank me. But soon, she thought of something and said softly, You have to take care of Manting's emotions. Don't scare the child with her constant changes. Shinluo An was stunned. He hadn't thought of that. When he heard Yi Qianqian's words, he was deeply convinced. He stood up and was about to go out, but before he could move, he heard Nanny He shouting, Manting, what are you doing? Shinjilia's heart skipped a beat. Yi Qianqian was also shocked and quickly ran out. When she went out, Nanny He was holding a fruit in one hand and a knife in the other. She looked at them helplessly and stamped her feet anxiously. Go after her. Manting ran away with Little Moon in her arms. Damn it. Yi Qianqian couldn't help but curse. Damn it. That jinx. A black shadow ran quickly beside her. Shinluo An's footsteps were very fast, and he was soon out of the villa. Yi Qianqian quickly ran after him and took out her cell phone to call Shinjilia. Shinluo An quickly ran to the left, and Yi Qianqian ran after him. This time, the call went through. Shinjilia had just finished a consultation and was taking a sip of water. When he saw his cell phone vibrate, he picked it up and said, I was busy just now. What's wrong? Old Shin, go home quickly. Manting ran away with the child. Shinjilia's heart skipped a beat. What's going on? Shinmanting didn't run far with the child in her arms. When he saw Shinluo An and Yi Qianqian run out, Shin Yuexiao couldn't help but open his eyes wide. He looked up at Shinmanting and asked in a childish voice, Mommy, are we playing hide and seek with Daddy? Shinmanting held the child in her arms and felt an indescribable sense of satisfaction. She hugged the baby tightly and said, Yes, when you see Daddy later, don't say anything. Mommy can only take you home after Daddy chooses Mommy. Oh. Shin Yuexiao didn't really understand. Shinmanting wiped away her tears and crouched through the garden of the villa. She walked out the back door with the baby in her arms. Nanny He was still in shock. She quietly hid at the side and watched Shinmanting leave with the baby. She quickly followed after her. She quietly picked up her phone and dialed Shinluo An's number. However, it seemed that Shinluo An didn't bring his cell phone with him, so no one answered. Seeing that Shinmanting was getting further and further away, Nanny He panicked and shouted, Little Moon, come back. Shinmanting froze when she heard this. When she turned around and saw Nanny He, she quickly picked up Little Moon and ran forward. Seeing this, Nanny he hurriedly chased after her and shouted, "Manting, stop running. Where are you going with little Moon? Come back." The weather in the imperial capital was still a little cold at this time. Manting was only wearing a thin spring skirt, which made her look very thin. A gust of wind blew, and she could only shiver with the baby in her arms. Chapter 2138. Manting looked back. Nanny he's figure was indescribably old. At this moment, she was running behind her at a very slow pace and seemed to be struggling. Manting suddenly felt a little sorry for her and kept looking back. When she saw Nanny he following her across the road, she finally couldn't help but shout, "Nanny he, you should go back." "I'll go back later. I'm just scaring him." When Nanny he heard this, she suddenly felt relieved. She looked at her with a helpless expression and shouted, "What's the use of scaring him? Come back quickly. Don't catch a cold later." "I'm happy." Manting shouted with a sob in her voice, "I'm feeling uncomfortable. What's wrong with taking our son out for a walk?" Nanny he felt even more helpless when she saw how confident she was. The sun was a little bright. Nanny he squinted and covered her eyes with her hand. She shouted, "Stop running. My old arms and legs can't take it. Come back quickly. Young master will be worried if you catch a cold." "No." Manting was very stubborn. She held the baby and pouted. "He doesn't love me." Yueshao saw that his mother was crying and raised his little hand to wipe her eyes. He whispered, "Don't cry, Mommy." Manting felt even more wronged and her tears flowed even more fiercely. She said, "Baby, if Daddy and Mommy aren't together anymore, will you go with Daddy or Mommy?" Little Moon was a little confused and at the same time a little confused. Why would they not be together anymore? He blinked his big dark eyes and asked, "Mommy, did you quarrel with Daddy?" When Manting heard this, her tears suddenly turned into laughter. "I've learned everything from you. You even know what quarreling means." Little Moon didn't quite understand what Manting meant by crying and laughing at the same time, but it seemed that she was praising him. The little fellow waved her arms happily and looked back with a grin. Suddenly, his eyes widened and he shouted, "Daddy." Manting was shocked and turned her head. She saw Luo and running in her direction. Manting suddenly panicked. She was like a child who had been caught doing something wrong. She was so scared that she burst into tears. She immediately ran forward with the baby in her arms. But Manting was wearing slippers and didn't even wear socks. His feet slipped from the oversized slippers to the ground, and the sharp pebbles pierced his soles. Manting cried out in pain and shouted, "Don't chase me. Don't chase me." But why would Luo listen? Luo was 1.8 meters tall and had long arms and legs. Manting couldn't outrun him in the first place. "Daddy." Little Moon stretched out his arms to receive his father's embrace when he saw Luo carrying him. Luo was still in a state of shock. He took his son in his arms and checked him from head to toe. He heaved a sigh of relief when he found that there was nothing wrong with him. When he looked down, he saw Manting hugging her feet and crying bitterly. Her cries were not soft and attracted the gazes of the few pedestrians on the street. Luo had no choice but to squat down and say, "Let me see." Manting cried even more fiercely. She sat on the ground and hugged her feet. She had no intention of responding to him at all. Luo felt a headache coming on. He didn't allow her to argue. He reached out and pried her hand away, then pulled her feet over. She turned the soles of her feet toward herself. The red bloodstains on the soles of her feet were very eye-catching. Chapter 2139. Even when he said such words, his voice was stiff. Enchanting cried even louder. She kicked him with her foot and said, "You don't love me anymore. I should have just left with our son. Why did you come out to look for me?" The surrounding wind was a little chilly, and he was worried that his wife and child would catch a cold. But when he heard what his wife said, he suddenly laughed. Enchanting felt guilty and sobbed a little. She wiped her eyes and said angrily, "What are you laughing at?" "I'm laughing at how cute my wife is." Enchanting reached out and rubbed her head. Then, he pulled her up and said, "Let's go home. My heart will ache if you freeze." The childish Enchanting needed to be coaxed. This way of getting along was the most appropriate and harmonious way for them to get along. Enchanting felt that he was back. She sobbed and stood up. She stretched out her arms, waiting for him to hug her. Enchanting smiled and lifted her up in his arms. It was a classic Princess Carrie. Enchanting wrapped her arms around his neck and suddenly burst out laughing. Enchanting's heart was filled with tenderness. He looked at the little woman in front of him with a smile and said softly, "You're not angry anymore." "Humph." Enchanting turned her head away, her body trembling as she cried. "Nanny," he finally caught up with them. She panted and shouted, "Young people run fast. Come on, little let's go home." Little Moon pouted enviously as he looked at Enchanting and Enchanting. He also wanted Daddy to hug him. Nanny, he could read the child's mind at a glance. She chuckled and said, "Go home first." Beep beep, the sound of a steam whistle. The familiar Porsche stopped beside them. The window of the driver's seat was rolled down, and Enchanting's face was revealed. When Enchanting saw them, he heaved a sigh of relief and said, "Get in the car. Don't catch a cold." Enchanting had no objections. He carried his wife to the back seat. Nanny, he carried the little fellow into the front passenger seat. She was only a short distance from home. When she got home, Enchanting was pacing back and forth in front of her house. When she saw that Enchanting had returned with so many people, she heaved a sigh of relief. After Enchanting parked the car, Enchanting immediately went up to him and whispered, "Did Big Brother tell you? F***ck. You scared me to death." His family's conditions were limited. Enchanting could only inquire about Enchanting's condition in Enchanting's relatively clean and spacious room. After understanding the situation, Enchanting had a rough idea of the situation. The way he asked the question was very clever. Enchanting didn't realize that she was being treated as a patient at all. The meeting ended easily. When Enchanting walked out, Enchanting was playing with a new puzzle with his son. The 24-grid map of Huaxia. Enchanting glanced at it and said, "Brother, come to my room for a while." Enchanting heard it too and quickly stood up. "I'll go too." Enchanting glanced at it and didn't have any objections. He quickly entered the room. Enchanting was the last to enter. She closed the door behind her and waited for Enchanting's diagnosis. "How is it?" Enchanting asked. "This situation is rather rare. Sister-in-law seems to understand Sister Enchanting's emotions very well," she said as she took out a notebook. "Now, there are two of them. Let's call them Big Enchanting and Little Enchanting." Enchanting and Enchanting looked over. Big Enchanting doesn't seem to know about Little Enchanting's existence, but Little Enchanting is the opposite. She can even predict when she will wake up. Chapter 2140. Hearing this, Enchanting and Enchanting were shocked. At the same time, Enchanting felt a chill down his spine. Adult Enchanting didn't know about Little Enchanting's existence, but Little Enchanting could predict an adult Enchanting would wake up. Moreover, she kept asking Enchanting to only love her, so as to erase the existence of adult Manting. Wasn't she only 12 years old? Why would a 12-year-old girl have such thoughts? One couldn't help but feel fear and trepidation. Seeing Shenluo An's reaction, Shenjilie seemed to have expected it. He tapped on the notebook with a pen and said slowly, "Of course, this is just my speculation. Adult Manting might not necessarily not know about little Manting's existence. But little Manting's malice towards adult Manting really exists." Shenluo An said in a low voice, "She doesn't want adult Manting to wake up." In fact, this was understandable. However, little Manting seemed to be a little different from what he imagined. It shouldn't be like this. Shenjilie was silent for a moment and then said, "Brother, you have to take good care of her. Even if she is only 12 years old, the mentality of an orphan still exists." Shenluo An frowned. Shenjilie looked at him and slowly said, "According to incomplete statistics, most orphans are mentally lonely. They are self-abased, selfish, lonely, and yearn for love and care. There's a difference between adult Manting and young Manting. Sister Manting has lived at home for so many years. Compared to He Yunsuan, her state of mind is different. You can't think about Sister Manting's thoughts and focus them on young Manting." Shenjilie looked at Shenluo An and waited for his reaction. Shenluo An smiled bitterly. "She is also Manting." "It's not the same," Shenjilie said. "With split personalities, each person has their own memories, their own personality, and their own thoughts. But between the main personality and the secondary personality, one will be dominant." Hearing this, Shenluo An felt a little uneasy. Yi Qianqian had already guessed something and exclaimed, "Do you mean that little Manting is now dominant?" Shenluo An's heart suddenly sank. Shenjilie was silent for a moment and nodded. "Not necessarily, but based on the current situation, it is only a matter of time before she becomes dominant." Shenluo An had mixed feelings. Brother, Big Manting and Little Manting are both Manting, but Big Manting is the real Manting. After saying that, Shenjilie had no intention of saying anything else. She tugged at Shenjilie's sleeve and asked, "Is there no way to level the playing field?" Shenjilie asked. "Is there no way to level the playing field?" "Yes." Shenjilie looked at Shenluo An calmly. "Whoever started the trouble needs to end it." When Shenluo An came out of Shenjilie's room, he saw Nanny sitting on the sofa. She was facing the children's toy room, peeling beans. When he saw Shenluo An coming over, he pointed his chin forward and gestured for him to come over. Shenluo An walked to the front and saw Shen Manting and the baby sitting on the ground playing. Shen Manting raised her head when she saw Shenluo An walking over. Her gaze was calm and indifferent. It was very calm. "You came." She got up and stroked the baby's head. "Play by yourself. Mommy has something to discuss with Daddy." Without a doubt, she was the adult Manting. Shenluo An relaxed slightly and followed her back to the room. Chapter 2141. Shenluo An, Shen Manting said and looked up at him. "I just saw the marriage certificate." Shenluo An paused and looked at her. Shen Manting looked up with an indescribable expression on her face and asked, "Have we registered our marriage?" After a long silence, Shenluo An replied, "Yes." "Yes." Shen Manting's face was expressionless. She whispered, "What have you done to me in the past 2 years?" "Manting, I didn't. How could I get married to you? How could I sleep with you?" Shen Manting was a little annoyed. She took his hand and walked to the bedside table. She opened the first drawer and took out a row of contraceptive products. "There are 10 in a box. There are only 7 here." Shenluo An was silent. Shen Manting continued, "This is your house. You can't bring another woman home to spend the night. So, when he used it, he must be using it on her. Unbeknownst to her, he had violated her once again. Thinking of this, Enchanting felt sad. A sense of resistance and grievance followed. Her eyes were sore and tears welled up again. Enchanting couldn't help but reach out and hold her in his arms. He called her name, Manting. Enchanting didn't resist. She let him hold her and let her hands fall to her sides. Tears welled up in her eyes. She choked and said, "I don't even know when I married you. You are a beast. If I knew, I wouldn't have married you." Beast. When she scolded him, she also used these two words. In the past, his heart would be filled with anger. But 3 years had passed. Enchanting felt nothing but bitterness in his heart. "Yes, I am a beast," Enchanting admitted. "But you are already married." He hugged her tighter and whispered, "I can't divorce you. For the sake of the child, for the sake of our parents, for the sake of you and me, I can't divorce you. You are my woman in life and my ghost in death." Enchanting smiled when she heard this. She struggled but couldn't break free. Enchanting made up his mind. He hugged her and said firmly, "We are husband and wife. You can hate me, but the child needs a mother." Enchanting stopped, and tears streamed down her cheeks. "I need you, too." Enchanting's heart skipped a beat as he spoke. Nervous and restless. But after he said that, he immediately felt enlightened. When he was questioned by young Manting just now, his wavering mind was resolved at this moment. He held her in his arms and said with certainty, "I want you." Only a sober Enchanting was the real Enchanting. Little Manting was just an accident. Even though he had done a lot of things to take advantage of others in this accident. But from the beginning to the end, he only regarded her as Enchanting who had lost her memory. In his eyes, she was still herself. Enchanting was held so tightly that she could even feel the vibration of his chest as he spoke. As soon as he said those 3 words, his mind seemed to be pierced by a scream. Enchanting felt a little uncomfortable. She reached out and pushed him, saying, "My head hurts." His heart was in a mess in an instant. Anger, grievance, and discomfort immediately assaulted him. Enchanting was in a trance. She looked at Enchanting and in front of her and subconsciously resisted such negative emotions. Chapter 2142. There was an indescribable tension in Enchanting's voice. Enchanting could clearly feel it. Her heartbeat was getting heavier and faster. As she watched Enchanting's back getting further and further away, her heart gradually became empty. When Enchanting let Enchanting over, Enchanting's consciousness was on the verge of collapse. Enchanting came forward to help her up and said, "Manting, wake up. Don't sleep." As he spoke, he gently patted Enchanting's cheek and shouted, "Wake up." Enchanting struggled to lift her eyelids, but it seemed that in the depths of her soul, someone was desperately trying to pull her into the darkness. Behind her was a bottomless abyss. Her vision was getting darker and darker. No, she didn't want to go. She didn't want to sleep. There was an inexplicable feeling, strong and clear. She had slept for a long time, and she couldn't sleep anymore. Enchanting's voice rang in her ears. Enchanting tried to struggle and raised her hand, but she quickly dropped it. She clearly wanted to reach out her hand, but she suddenly withdrew it. It was her, but it wasn't her. No, no, someone was stopping her from touching Enchanting. Who was it? Enchanting, get out of here. A loud shout exploded in her ears like a clap of thunder. Suddenly, Enchanting felt her heart clench, and in the blink of an eye, she opened her eyes. The feeling of being pulled faded away, and her eyes slowly brightened. Only then did she realize that she was gasping for breath. Shen Luo and was holding her, and in front of him were Shenjilia and Yi Qianqian. Shenjilia's face was pale and somewhat solemn. Yi Qianqian, on the other hand, was surprised and worried. She asked nervously, "Sister-in-law, are you okay?" Shen Manting was stunned. When the voice fell into her ears, it seemed that it had taken several turns in her mind before it triggered her reaction. Shen Manting supported her body with her hands and sat up. She looked at Shenjilia and then at Yi Qianqian and shook her head. "I'm fine." The throbbing pain in her head seemed to have subsided, and the pain had dissipated a lot. "Jilia," Shen Manting looked up and leaned weakly on Shen Luofen. She couldn't sit up straight at all. She looked at Shenjilia and asked, "Whose name were you calling just now?" Shenjilia looked at Shen Manting and asked, "Do you know who I am?" Shen Manting was stunned. "I know." "Do you know who's behind you?" Shen Manting subconsciously turned her head when she heard that. When she saw him, she asked, "What the hell are you doing?" "There's something wrong with your mind." "Do you know that?" Shenjilia asked again. "Do you feel strange anywhere? Tell me." Shen Manting vaguely felt something. When she heard this, she was silent for a moment before saying, "Am I a little crazy?" Otherwise, she wouldn't have done so many things with Shen Luo and without her knowing. If he had been sober, she might have accepted it, but she would not have been so happy. In those vague memories and feelings, she was very cooperative most of the time when they were having sex. That wasn't her. "Yeah," Shenjilia replied. "Tell me what you're feeling. Otherwise, you'll be in grave danger." "Is it very dangerous?" Shen Manting raised her eyes. Despite her exhaustion, there was a sharpness in her eyes. "Will I die?" Chapter 2143. Shenjilia's words made Shen Manting feel a little stunned. For a moment, she couldn't understand what he meant. After a while, she said, "Brain death." She couldn't think of any other explanation. But as soon as this thought came to her mind, Shen Manting felt flustered. If she was brain dead, it would be better to die directly. She was no longer in a vegetative state. Her body was still breathing, but there was no soul in it. When Shenjilia heard this, he shook his head gently. "It's worse than brain death. There are now two personalities in your body. Do you know that?" Shen Manting was suddenly shocked, and her heart beat faster and heavier. She subconsciously turned to look at Shen Luo and Shen Manting, trying to find a hint of rebuttal or a joke on their faces. But there was none. Not at all. Yi Qianqian seemed a little sad, while Shen Luo pursed his lips and remained silent. "Are you saying that I have a split personality?" Shen Manting looked at Shenjilia and immediately thought of the strange things that had happened in the past 2 days. Sometimes she was clearly aware that she was sleeping, but her body would send clear senses, as if she was moving at night. But she thought she was dreaming. Shen Manting only felt that it was ridiculous, and she laughed, but the uneasiness in her heart grew stronger. Looking at their very serious expressions, she asked, "Did I faint just now?" After being pulled by that huge force, she lost consciousness. It was exactly the same as just now. But at that time, she didn't struggle and directly fainted. She thought it was because she was in poor health. She didn't want to resist, so she let it go. Seeing Shenjilia nod, Shen Manting felt even more ridiculous. She laughed and said, "Then, I had a dream. In the dream, I ran out with Little Moon. It was very cold outside, and Nanny he chased after me. Then, Shen Luo carried me home. I was very happy." As she spoke, Shen Manting noticed that Yi Qianqian and Shen Luo's expressions were a little strange. The two of them looked at each other, and Yi Qianqian nodded at her and said, "These things really happened. You weren't dreaming." An unprecedented fear engulfed Shenmanting. So, she had always been in an unhealthy mental state. Dual personality refers to a person's mental state being greatly stimulated. When this mental state is unable to bear it, under the great pressure, it will form another personality that is opposed to the original personality. Shenjilia enunciated each word clearly. Logically speaking, you've always existed. You should be the primary personality. Shenmanting was surrounded by fear of the unknown, and her heart was filled with unease. She instinctively held on to his hand. This did not alleviate her fear, but it was better than nothing. However, it's obvious that you haven't been awake for long, or perhaps you don't even know about the existence of another personality. Your position is very dangerous. Her consciousness is stronger than yours, and she wants to be the dominant one. She's slowly invading and occupying you. In other words, Little Manting was killing Big Manting bit by bit. Unlike the naivety she displayed, she selfishly obeyed her instincts. Everyone wanted to live, even an accidental personality was no exception. Chapter 2144. But such a dream was too real for her now. Just as she was dreaming, with every touch and every word, she could completely feel their appearances. It was true. What they said was true. What should I do? Shenmanting's voice was choked with fear. Am I really going to die? In the face of death, anyone would be instinctively afraid. Moreover, Shenmanting's situation seemed to be worse than death. Shenjilia looked at her and said, "There's a way, as long as you cooperate." What way? Shenmanting looked at him. Do I have to take medicine? Will medicine work in this state? Calm down. Don't be nervous. Shenjilia looked at her. It'll be fine. It was impossible for Shenmanting not to be nervous. At this moment, she only felt fear and confusion. She's only 12 years old. Shenjilia's voice seemed to be full of magic. The reason why she can threaten your position is because she took the initiative. She sensed the existence of the opposing personality before you, so it's normal for you to be passive. Shenmanting immediately sat up as if she had grasped a life-saving straw. What do you mean? From now on, you already know of her existence. Based on your nearly 30 years of experience, is your mental strength weaker than a 12-year-old girl? No, obviously not. Shenmanting's heart calmed down at this moment, and she secretly heaved a sigh of relief. But soon, Shenmanting smiled bitterly. She's me, the 12-year-old me, right? Yes. Then her state of mind won't be weak. Shenmanting looked up. When I was young, I was even stronger than when I grew up. But you've grown up, Shenjilia's words were meaningful. But she hasn't. Shenmanting was stunned. She vaguely seemed to understand what he meant. Shenmanting persisted for a long time. Finally, she couldn't bear the sleepiness and fell asleep. Shenluo and lay quietly beside her and gently held her in his arms, silently accompanying her. Drowsiness hit him, and Shenluo unclosed his eyes. Just as he was falling asleep, the person beside him suddenly moved. Shenluo and immediately opened his eyes. Shenmanting flipped over and naturally lifted her legs to support his body. She buried her head in his arms. Shenluo's heart softened slightly at her intimate behavior. However, at the same time, he was also clear. Only young Manting would do that. After keeping his eyes open for a while, he couldn't stand it anymore and fell into a deep sleep. After sleeping for an unknown period of time, the person in his arms gently trembled. Shenluo subconsciously hugged her tightly, then opened his eyes. Suddenly, his eyes met with a pair of pitch-black and bright eyes. Shenluo was startled by the sudden appearance of such a pair of eyes in the dim light around him. The person in front of him was obviously shocked by him. she said with some grievance. Hubby. Her weak voice carried the tenderness of a young girl. Shenluo and heaved a sigh of relief. When he came back to his senses, he was already drenched in cold sweat. When did you wake up? Asked Shenluo, and his voice was a little hoarse, as if he had just woken up. Enchanting wrapped her arms around his waist and said, I just woke up. Did I scare you? A little. At the same time, Shenluo and felt a little upset in his heart. How could she still look so naive? Caven woke up even later. He looked up a bunch of information. Sleep early, everyone. Chapter 21:45. How could she still look so naive? She looked just like little Manting a few days ago. He couldn't help but love her. Little Manting pouted and leaned over. She pecked Shenluo's lips and said, Honey, don't you like me anymore? Shenluo's heart trembled. Little Manting was still young, but she was very sensitive to the distance between people. Shenluo tried to relax and said softly, Why not? Enchanting smiled happily. She pouted and said, Kiss me then. Little dirty girl, you haven't even brushed your teeth. Shenluo tapped her nose and then pecked her. It's still dark. Sleep a little longer. Well, I won't sleep. Enchanting said coquettishly and twisted in Shenluo's arms. I want to be with you. It's me, not anyone else. While speaking, Enchanting hugged Shenluo's arm and rubbed her thighs against it. She whispered, Honey, I miss you so much. Shenluo's suppressed desire for a few days was instantly ignited by her gentle teasing. Using his large hands to block her thighs, he pressed his body against hers and pressed her firmly against him. Enchanting was looking forward to it. Her eyes were shining. She raised her head and kissed him. Her lips fell on his face and made a bo-bo sound. Shenluo tilted his head slightly and asked in a low voice, Aren't your relatives still around? Enchanting pouted and said, But I miss you so much. Her look made Shenluo's body even more hot. He turned over and lay down again. He pressed her thighs to prevent her from moving and whispered, Sleep well. If you provoke me again, I'll hit you. You're shameless to hit a woman. Bah! Enchanting said in a low voice. Shenluo didn't stand on ceremony. He slapped her butt and said, Go to sleep. Enchanting didn't listen to him. She hugged him and touched his body naughtily. Shenluo was touched by her. He simply grabbed her hand and pressed it under his body. If you don't sleep, I'll kick you out. Enchanting didn't show any signs of repentance. She smiled and said, Sleep. How can I sleep with you like this? But, when you did it, I was also sleeping. Although she didn't sleep very well, she would still close her eyes when she was extremely sleepy. Shenluo he grabbed her hand and restrained her with his thigh. Their bodies were firmly pressed against each other, and Enchanting couldn't make any more trouble. Enchanting's eyes gradually darkened as she lay on his chest. Greedily feeling the breath of the man in front of her, little Manting's heart was moved. How blissful! How could such happiness be snatched away by another person? Moreover, this person did not like her husband at all. She had no right to deprive her of everything. Even if she was the grown-up version of herself. Shenluo didn't open his eyes, but he knew that she was awake. Fortunately, she didn't make any strange movements. The night passed peacefully. When Shenluo woke up, it was already bright outside. The woman in his arms still maintained that position, breathing evenly. Shenluo gently loosened his grip. As he moved, Enchanting also opened her eyes at the same time. When she saw Shenluo's face, she seemed a little startled. Then, she calmed down and said, "Morning." Shenluo and smiled bitterly when he saw her attitude. He could actually recognize who was who between them. Chapter 2146. After maintaining the same posture for a long time, Shenmanting's body felt a little stiff. He stretched out his hand with some difficulty and moved it a little. Just as he twisted his neck, a large hand was placed on his shoulder. His warm palm pressed on her shoulder, neither too lightly nor too heavily. Shenmanting was flattered, and her heartbeat quickened. Shenmanting was a little embarrassed, so she shrugged her shoulders and said softly, "There's no need." Shenluo and didn't let go and asked, "Is it sour here?" "I'm getting up." "Or here?" Shenluo and pressed his palm against her waist again. Shenmanting was on her period, so she wasn't feeling well. Being pressed like this, she felt so comfortable that her eyes narrowed. So, she just let him be and closed her eyes to enjoy it. Shenluo and continued massaging and pinching her arm with the same amount of force. Shenmanting flinched and whispered, "It's ticklish." Her soft voice was like a feather brushing past his heart. Shenluo's heart softened. Not only did he not stop, but he pinched her twice more mischievously. Shenmanting couldn't help laughing and said, "Stop fooling around. Get up." Perhaps, even Shenmanting herself didn't realize how charming she was at that moment. Shenluo's heart fluttered. He pulled her into his arms and asked softly, "Do you feel uncomfortable?" "No." Shenmanting squirmed. "Let go of me. I'm going to the bathroom." Shenluo and finally released her. She immediately got up and ran to the bathroom barefoot. Shenmanting closed the door. She could clearly sense that she was acting strangely. She seemed to be different from before. Shenluo and hadn't done anything overboard, but her heart was pounding. It must be because of young Manting. She knew that little Manting liked Shenluo and very much, but she didn't expect her to like him to this extent. She was actually affected as well. Caught off guard, it permeated naturally. After washing up, Shenmanting changed her sanitary pad. Only then did she realize that her period was almost over. For a moment, she was in a trance. It felt like a long time had passed since he woke up. There were so many things to struggle with in his mind that even time seemed to slow down. When they came out, Shenluo and walked in with his son. Shen Yueshao was petite. His chubby little face and big, dark eyes were exactly the same as hers. When he saw her, his little face immediately bloomed into a smile, and he shouted, "Mama." Shen Yueshao shook off his father's hand and threw himself into Shenmanting's arms. Shenmanting picked him up with a smile and asked, "What's wrong?" "Mommy, ride the wooden horse." The little guy simply expressed what he wanted, and his eyes were full of beautiful brilliance. "Daddy will go too." Shenmanting's lips curled into a smile and she couldn't help but kiss the little boy on the cheek. But soon, she looked at Shenluo and asked, "Can I?" She knew her situation. She couldn't completely control her consciousness and body. If she took the baby out, it would be dangerous. However, she had already stood the baby up once yesterday. If she did it again today, it wouldn't be good for the child's education. It is said that one can judge one's age at 3. For a child, the best time to shape his personality was before the age of 3. Chapter 2147. Little Moon was still young, but he understood what his father meant. She pouted her lips and said unhappily, "All right." Shenluo and felt a little sorry for him. He rubbed his little head and said, "Daddy will buy you some marshmallows later." The little boy's eyes immediately lit up and he said, "Okay." Shenluo and had been exhausted recently. He felt that it had been a long time since he took the child out to play. Enchanting was wearing a skirt and a coat. She held her son's hand and stood in front of the marshmallow stall with Enchanting, watching the marshmallows being made with her son. The little boy was particularly engrossed. When the red and green marshmallows were ready, he immediately jumped up and shouted, "Hooray!" Enchanting took it and handed it to him. Little Moon held it in his hand with satisfaction, his little face smiling. Enchanting handed Enchanting a small bamboo stick. She quickly understood and used the small bamboo stick to dig out the marshmallows and fed them to the little boy. However, Little Moon was greedy and couldn't help but stick out his tongue to lick the marshmallows. Soon, his little face was covered with sticky marshmallows. "It's dirty. Slow down." Enchanting bent down and looked at him helplessly. However, her temperament was completely different from when Enchanting was in charge. At this moment, the atmosphere was so strong that even Enchanting could clearly feel her love for the child. After all, little Enchanting was still a child. Perhaps she knew that this was her son, but in her consciousness, after all, it didn't come from her body, so the feeling was not as strong as it was for Enchanting. Enchanting fed the little boy candy carefully and patiently. It was such a simple and boring process, but Enchanting was fascinated by it. It wasn't until the candy was almost finished that Enchanting realized something was wrong. She looked up and saw Enchanting looking at her with tenderness in her eyes. Her heart skipped a beat and she immediately straightened up and asked, "What's wrong?" Enchanting shook his head gently and said, "Let's go to the park with the baby." The park was not far from home. There was a hand-turned wooden horse inside, and many children were willing to play there. Enchanting picked up the little boy and said, "Daddy will take you to ride the wooden horse." Enchanting's big eyes lit up. "Thank you, Daddy." "Wipe it first. It's sticky." Enchanting reached out to Enchanting. Enchanting immediately reacted and took out a pack of wet tissues. It was a completely subconscious action. Enchanting pulled out a wet tissue and handed it to him before she realized that something was wrong. It was too natural. It was as if he had experienced this countless times, and it had become a habit. It was little Enchanting felt a little upset. It was as if something that belonged to him had been violated. It was a very uncomfortable feeling. After wiping the little girl's face, he turned around and noticed that something was wrong with her. "What's wrong?" he asked. Enchanting shook her head. "Let's go." When they arrived at the park, there were already many children running around. Boys and girls played together in groups of 3 to 5. Parents brought their children to play in the park. There were old people and young couples. Enchanting was in high spirits and struggled to get out of his father's arms. He ran excitedly to the merry-go-round and turned to call out to Enchanting, "Dad." Enchanting carried him up and said, "Hold on tight. The merry-go-round is about to move." "Okay." He then looked at Enchanting and said, "Mommy, let's play together." Chapter 2148. Enchanting's lips curled into a smile at her precious son's sincere invitation. But she quickly rubbed the little boy's head and said, "Mommy is an adult. You can't play here. This is for children." "But Mommy used to play here." "That's different. There are adults in the amusement park, but there are only children here." "Oh." Enchanting didn't quite understand, but he was soon pushed around by Enchanting. Giggles could be heard endlessly, and there were also the sounds of other children giggling around. Enchanting looked at her son in front of her and couldn't help smiling. But the sounds around her seemed to be getting farther and farther away. Everything in front of her was white. She was in a daze. She turned her head and reached out to grab Enchanting. Enchanting looked at her sideways and asked, "What's wrong?" Enchanting's vision was getting wider and wider, and her consciousness seemed to be dragged by someone. She opened her mouth but couldn't speak. Then, her vision darkened, and her whole body softly fell into his arms. Enchanting didn't know what was wrong with her. She was surrounded by dazzling whiteness. After walking for an unknown amount of time in a daze, he finally saw a small figure. She was thin and sallow. She was 12 years old, but she looked like she was only 10 years old. She was wearing the leftover clothes of the other brothers and sisters in the orphanage. They were washed white and looked a little dirty. Hyunsuin sat in the corner and stared blankly at the little thing that she didn't know what it was. She seemed to notice her arrival and raised her head to look at her. Enchanting saw herself when she was 12 years old, and her feelings were indescribably complicated. Hyunsuin walked over slowly and smiled at her. "You're here. I've been waiting for you for a long time." Enchanting looked at him, and the surroundings were distorted again. She knew that she was dreaming. This kind of dream was different from the days when the body was dominated by another personality. It was completely random and unorganized. But at the same time, she also knew that this was another personality trying to communicate with her and meet her. So she saw Hyunsuin. The surrounding environment changed again and again, and she seemed to return to a very young age in the orphanage, secretly drawing on the wall with her good friend Zhang Meifang. When the dean found out, he stomped his feet and flew into a rage. He looked for a stick everywhere and tried to beat someone up. The two little girls ran away in fear and amusement. Their eyes were filled with laughter after the prank. After an unknown amount of time, she was suddenly pressed against the washstand and ravaged. Anne's face was filled with lust. She felt a dull pain in her heart, and she retreated. The scene changed again. She was pinned under the man's body, and the room was completely dark. She could hear the man's low panting and sighing beside her ear. His voice was almost sorrowful as he repeated, "Manting, I love you. Manting, don't hate me." His body was in pain, and his heart was twitching. Suddenly, the voice in her ears disappeared, and a huge force pushed her down. In front of her was Hyunsuin's young face, almost twisted with hatred and madness. She said, "Go to hell. You thief. Die. Die. Die." Enchanting felt as if she was standing on the edge of a cliff. She was suddenly pushed down, and her whole body trembled. When he opened his eyes, everything was dark. His body was already drenched in sweat. Chapter 2149. Enchanting was in a trance. She listened to the sound in her ears and stared at the darkness above her head. After a long time, she suddenly came to her senses. She turned her head and saw that Shenluo and was looking at her with tears in his eyes. His large palm brushed across her face, and she felt a cool sensation on her face. Enchanting realized that she had already burst into tears. Shenluo and hugged her and whispered, "You slept for a long time, and it's already early in the morning." Miraculously, Enchanting's heart was calm at this moment. She gently placed her palm on his arm and asked, "Did little Manting wake up?" As she spoke, Enchanting suddenly realized that her throat was terribly hoarse. It was dry and painful, like the price of screaming hysterically. Shenluo didn't know what to say, so he whispered, "I'll get you a glass of hot water." "Yes," Enchanting replied and watched as he got up and got out of bed. She propped herself up and sat up, feeling a little urgent. She got up and found that her whole body was sore and weak. She wanted to get out of bed, but she barely had enough strength. Enchanting found her slippers. Her footsteps were light, and she moved very slowly. She was on the verge of collapsing, as if she could directly lie down in the next second. When Shenluo came in with the water, he saw Enchanting standing and was shocked. He quickly came forward to support her. Enchanting leaned softly in his arms and took the water from his hand. After drinking a lot of it, she felt a little better. Looking at his red eyes, she couldn't help but ask, "What's wrong with me?" Enchanting shook his head and put the cup aside. "Do you want to go to the toilet?" "Yes." Enchanting felt a little embarrassed. "Help me there, I'll do it myself." Enchanting did as he was told. After hearing the sound of water being flushed, he turned around to help her. "I don't have any strength," Enchanting said in a low voice. "How did this happen?" "There are some side effects from the injection just now." Enchanting directly carried her in his arms. "Sleep a little longer." Enchanting didn't object. She squinted her eyes and still felt a little sleepy. However, after experiencing the dream, she didn't dare to sleep again. Looking at Enchanting, who was obviously not right, Enchanting asked again, "What's wrong with me?" Enchanting was silent for a moment before he said, "Little Manting came out this afternoon." Enchanting seemed to have expected it. She wanted to commit suicide. Enchanting closed his eyes, looking extremely exhausted. Enchanting's heart skipped a beat. She immediately thought of the hoarse and resentful words she heard in her dream, "Go to hell." She wanted to commit suicide, but it was her body that died. Because he couldn't get it, he decided to destroy it. Enchanting still had a lingering fear in her heart. She held Enchanting's hand and asked, "And then?" "It didn't work. I asked Julia to give you an injection," Enchanting said as he caressed her face. "You'll get better. There's already a way to control little Manting's mental strength. You'll get better slowly." However, they could no longer stay at home. What happened today had scared the elderly and the children. Enchanting kissed her gently on the cheek and said softly, "We may need to move." "Where to?" "I have a house in Nanshan district. It's in the suburbs and close to Julia's hospital. Let's go there, shall we? Is that all right?" He asked softly, but she didn't know which word he said stung her eyes. Enchanting's tears rolled down in an instant, but she quickly forced them back. Chapter 2150. It took less than 3 days to move to the new house. The house wasn't big, but it was quiet. There were 3 bedrooms and 2 living rooms, and the decoration was cool, revealing a man's taste and toughness. Enchanting walked in and straightened out her clothes in the master bedroom's cloakroom. She and Enchanting's clothes. Enchanting and Enchanting also moved in together, so that Enchanting could accompany her and keep an eye on Enchanting's condition. Enchanting had always been taking care of Enchanting's condition, so he had no intention of changing doctors. He only occasionally asked Luo Ran to take a look. Enchanting tidied up her clothes and was making the bed in the room when she heard the door open. Enchanting was back. Inexplicably, Enchanting felt a sense of satisfaction. It was like a normal wife waiting for her husband to come home. It was wonderful and happy. Hearing the sound of plastic bags outside, Enchanting made the bed and walked out. Enchanting was washing rice and cooking. When he saw her come out, he asked, "Are you done?" "Not yet." Enchanting walked over and glanced at the vegetables he had bought. "There are still some things that haven't been cleaned up, but they can be done later." Enchanting took out the fresh ingredients and put them directly on the edge of the sink. She slowly began to tidy them up. Enchanting saw the smile on her lips and felt a little strange. He asked tentatively, "Are you happy today?" Enchanting quickly suppressed the corners of her mouth and said, "It's all right." Enchanting didn't say anything. He poured the rice into the new pot and asked, "Is it because you moved to a new house?" Enchanting couldn't help but smile and said, "Well, that's one of the reasons." He stopped asking and helped her to tidy up the ingredients. Enchanting's mood was better than it had been in the past few days. She smiled unconsciously and asked casually, "When will Julia and Enchanting move in?" "Tomorrow. I have to go to the laboratory tomorrow. Lao Wu can't handle it anymore," Shenluo and said in a soft voice. "I have a lot of things to do, and they are waiting for me to take over." "Well, will Enchanting come tomorrow?" "I'll leave when she comes." "Okay." Enchanting looked sideways and whispered, "When will you come back?" Shenluo and was obviously very surprised. After staring blankly for a while, he curled his lips and said, "I'll come back once I'm done." Enchanting turned her head away, and her cheeks were a little red. She seemed unhappy and said, "It's as good as not saying anything. It won't take long. It shouldn't be a big deal. One afternoon should be enough." Shenluo and inched closer to her and called out, "Manting." Shen Manting was washing vegetables. She lowered her head and responded, "Look up." Shen Manting subconsciously raised her head when she heard his words. The corners of Shenluo An's lips curled up. He quickly lowered his head and kissed the corner of her lips gently. Shen Manting's smile widened, but she didn't say anything. After washing the vegetables, she went to prepare the other ingredients. Shenluo and felt at ease. When she finished processing the ingredients in her hands, he chased her inside. She was the backbone of the kitchen. With Nanny He at home, Shenluo and was in charge of the family's food. He was used to not having to worry about food and clothing since he was a child, so he rarely had the opportunity to enter the kitchen. His culinary skills were all learned from watching Shenjilia cook for Yi Qianqian. The taste wasn't as good as Shenjilia's, but it wasn't too bad and was still acceptable. After finishing the last dish, he served it on the dining table. Chapter 2151. Shenluo An's heart was in his throat. His body reacted faster than his brain. He immediately rushed to the door of the room and saw Shen Manting looking at the cabinet on the floor helplessly. The bedside table, which had been placed properly, suddenly fell to the ground. Everything on it fell to the ground. Fortunately, there was no glass or anything that was broken. Shenluo and stepped forward to support Shen Manting. "What happened?" Shen Manting was a little confused and said, "I think little Manting came out just now." Shenluo and gently pulled her into his arms and whispered, "And then?" "Then she toppled the cabinet. I didn't want her to do it, so I came back on my own." Shen Manting hugged him. "It was so scary. Don't be afraid. We're fine now, aren't we?" Shenluo and comforted her softly. "Wash your hands first and eat. We'll come back later." "Okay," Shen Manting replied quickly. For some reason, Shenluo and felt a little strange. He couldn't tell what was strange about it, but there seemed to be something wrong somewhere. He held Shen Manting's hand as they walked out and washed their hands together. Then, he scooped a bowl of rice for both of them. Shen Manting took it and ate slowly with the chopsticks. He seemed to be especially fond of that plate of crispy fried ribs. Shenluo and glanced at it and asked, "How is it?" "It's delicious," Shen Manting replied. She glanced at him and said, "But Nanny He's cooking is still the best." Shenluo An's heart sank when he heard this. Without batting an eyelid, he nodded and said, "Then I will improve next time." Shen Manting didn't say another word. The rest of the journey was very quiet. Shenluo An was preoccupied with his own thoughts. After dinner, he glanced at Shen Manting and said, "I won't be able to see my son for some time. I've arranged for him to go to kindergarten in September. I'm not sure if he'll be able to get used to it." "Of course he can," Shen Manting said with certainty. "Little Moon is the smartest child I've ever met. By September, he'll probably be better than all the other children. Yes, Shenluo replied, but his mood was low. He casually said, I think so too. A smile appeared on Shenmanting's face. After she finished eating, she cleared the dishes and went to the kitchen to wash the dishes. Shenluo's heart sank as he watched her busy figure in the kitchen. He sent Shenjilia a WeChat message, Jilia. Jilia. Shenluo and little Manting is out. Shenjilia was still packing up when he saw those words. His heart skipped a beat and he immediately asked, what's the situation now? Shenluo and she's pretending to be the adult Manting. Shenjilia was a little confused. What does it mean to pretend to be an adult? After a long pause, he said, do you have violent tendencies? Shenluo and not yet. Jilia, hang in there. Qianqian and I will be there tomorrow. When he put his phone away, Shenmanting had already come out of the kitchen. What are you busy with? Shenmanting asked casually, as if she didn't care about it. He put down his phone and walked over to her. He hugged her gently and said, I'm looking up information. What information? How to decorate a happy nest. Shenmanting blushed slightly and hugged him. Okay, let's investigate it together. Let's go and clean up the room. Shenluo gently kissed her forehead. Little Manting is too naughty. What's so fun about the bedside table? Chapter 2152. Probably, Shenluo said with a sigh. You're right. I'm sorry. Shenmanting didn't expect him to say that. She was lost in thought for a moment and then said, there's nothing to be sorry about. She appeared later. First come, first served, don't you think so? Her eyes were slightly warm as she said that. She let go of him and walked into the room with her back to him. Shenluo looked at her back and didn't see anything strange about her. However, one could also feel the desolation of being abandoned. Shenluo followed her and said softly, there's no such thing. Big Manting is Manting, and little Manting is Manting. In my opinion, they're the same. Shenmanting had her back to him and he couldn't tell what she was feeling. She picked up the things scattered on the floor and didn't make a sound. Shenluo went forward and lifted the bedside table that had fallen down. He said slowly, they're both Manting and the women I love. I'm the least qualified person to favor one and discriminate against the other. Shenmanting couldn't help but look up at him. Her eyes were even more warm. Shenluo turned his back to her and said, Manting, I love you and her. I don't want you to kill each other. I want you to be well. However, that was impossible. Only one of them could exist. It had to be the big one or the little one. Shenmanting stood up with the things in her arms and said, you know it's impossible. It's possible, Shenluo said softly. You're the same person. Why can't you live together? Shenluo turned around and said softly, Manting, you're kind. Little Manting was very simple and naive and she was a child. Although her mood has been a little unstable recently, it's only because her existence is threatened. This is human nature. Shenmanting listened to his words and silently put the things back on the bedside table. Shenluo gently hugged her from behind and whispered, but she may not know how important you are to me. Shenmanting's body stiffened slightly. You were with me when I was most depressed, Shenluo said softly. And after you slept in the hospital for 2 years, it was little Manting who was by my side and accompanied me through the lowest point. No one can replace her. Shenmanting didn't say anything, but her eyes were filled with tears. She reached out and put her hand on his hand, which was holding her, and said in a choked voice, what if you have to choose one of the two? Shenluo leaned against her neck and pretended not to notice her strange behavior. He seemed to be thinking about it and said, "Why do we have to choose? If we choose, the outcome will be a lose-lose situation. But this is a lose-lose situation. Everyone wants to survive." Shenmanting called out his name, but in her heart, she had an even greater desire to call him hubby. She hugged his hand and turned her head away. She wanted to kiss him. She wanted to kiss him. However, it seemed that Elder Manting would not do so. Although she was gentle now, she still resisted her husband's touch. She stared at him for a long time, but in the end, she did not raise her head. Unexpectedly, Shenluo reached out and held her chin. He lowered his head and kissed her lips softly. Shenmanting couldn't hold it in any longer, and tears rolled down her cheeks. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him while sobbing. Chapter 2153. It was as if he hadn't touched her for a long time. Pressing her under his body, Shenluo's desire poured out from the depths of his body. Shenmanting hugged him, her hands eagerly fumbled for the corner of his clothes and lifted his clothes. The two of them were entangled and rolled around each other instinctively. The moment Shenluo entered, Shenmanting hugged him contentedly and couldn't help but cry out, "Honey, I love you too." Shenluo gently kissed the corner of her lips. "No matter who you are, I love you. I only love you." Shenmanting suddenly realized that she seemed to have been exposed. She looked down at Shenluo and it was obvious that he already knew. An indescribable emotion suddenly filled her body. But before she could open her mouth to say anything, her body was like a wave, floating up and down with him. Tears flowed from the corner of her eyes, and Shenmanting climbed onto his waist. The world seemed to have gone far away, and there was only one sentence left in her mind: "I love you, I only love you." In the middle of the night, Shenmanting woke up with an extremely unbearable feeling. The man who appeared in her countless nightmares, once again pressed her under his body. Shenmanting couldn't tell what she was feeling, but she followed his movements and let go of herself, moaning happily. Shenluo kissed her softly, and whispered, "Is it you?" At the same time, she sank heavily, and Shenmanting groaned, as if the softest place in the depths of her heart was suddenly hit by him. She grabbed his shoulders with both hands and said intermittently, "It's me." Shenluo slightly stiffened, but Manting under him not only didn't resist, but also gave a more skillful response than little Manting. The night was lingering. When it was over, the sky was already bright. Shenmanting was so tired that she fell into a deep sleep, but Shenluo still held her and looked at her. After a long time, he suddenly smiled, closed his eyes, and fell asleep. The next day, he was woken up by the doorbell. He looked at the time, and it was 10:18 in the morning. Shenluo was so sleepy that he didn't even take a shower last night. Now that he got out of bed, Shenluo felt dizzy walking. Firstly, he didn't have enough sleep. Secondly, he was almost squeezed dry. He casually put on some casual clothes and got up to open the door. When Shenjilie saw the expression on Shenluo's face, he immediately tugged at his wife and said, "Brother, hurry up and go inside. You're affecting the city's appearance." Shenluo Yi Qianqian was a little dazed. Before she could recover her wits, Shenluo had already walked inside. Shenjilie and Yi Qianqian moved on their own. Actually, they didn't have many things. They just needed to put their clothes and toiletries in the bag, and everything else would be taken care of. The couple glanced at the closed door of the master bedroom and kindly decided not to disturb it. After diligently buying groceries, they even rang the doorbell once. It was Shenluo again. He still had the sleepy expression on his face. Shenjilie and Yi Qianqian clicked their tongues. Yi Qianqian whispered, "Big brother was really intense last night." Shenjilie replied, I can tell. TSK, as Yi Qianqian washed the vegetables, she muttered, I'm so jealous. Shenjilie asked, what do you mean by that? Yi Qianqian snorted. That's exactly what I meant. Chapter 2154. Tisk, Yi Qianqian said in disdain. Paper tiger. Ever since the miscarriage, he didn't dare to do anything to her. Especially since she had been taking Chinese medicine recently, the old Chinese doctor had repeatedly reminded her that she must be careful during sex, careful during sex, careful during sex, careful during sex, and must not get pregnant during this period of time. As a result, Yi Qianqian was forced to abstain from sex. In the past, Shenjilia's needs in that regard. Apart from when she could rest during her period, she would always beg him to let her go. Later on, she became the one who took the initiative. Not only did Shenjilia restrain himself, but he was also extremely gentle. Once or twice a week. After that, she went to take a shower. The gap is a little big. T_T Shenjilia's heart was ablaze with anger. He placed his hands on either side of her body and gritted his teeth as he said, wasn't I taking care of your body? Yi Qianqian pursed her lips and didn't say anything. Unexpectedly, Shenjilia picked her up by her legs and hung her up with his thighs against the wall. He lowered his head and kissed her on the lips. His wet palms rubbed against her body as if he was ravaging her in revenge. Yi Qianqian felt a little pain from the rubbing. She reached out and pushed him away. Ouch! It hurts, his voice was muffled, but in this small space, the ambiguous atmosphere overflowed. Ding ding, the sound of a key. It was obvious that someone had done it on purpose. Shenjilia froze and turned to look. Yi Qianqian immediately returned to her senses and pushed him away. When she saw Shenluo standing at the door, she blushed. He quickly turned around and continued to wash the vegetables, pretending that nothing had happened. Shenluo threw the key on the table and said, don't press the doorbell anymore. Open the door yourself next time. Oh. Also, Shenluo glanced at him, remember to return to your room next time. You're affecting the city's appearance. What a joke, he was the owner of the house. He hadn't tried cooking in the kitchen yet. Yi Qianqian's back was facing them as she washed the vegetables. When she heard this, her face turned even redder. After Shenluo left, she kicked Shenjilia. It's all your fault. Don't provoke me. Shenjilia bent over and pressed his forehead against hers. He warned her softly, otherwise, I'll show you why the sun is so red. Why? F***ck. By the time she finished cooking, Shenluo and Enchanting had already washed up and came out of the bathroom. It was exactly 12:30. Enchanting was wearing a thin white sweater with a high collar and a smile on her face. It was the kind of mature and intelligent smile, indescribably charming and amorous. Without a doubt, she was the adult Manting. One look and you can tell that it's Jilia's cooking. Manting took the rice from Yi Qianqian and smiled. We should be the ones cooking. Let me make dinner. Who's being polite? Shenjilia glanced at her. You're acting like you don't know me. You can continue eating. Remember to wash the dishes when you're done. Don't listen to him. Yi Qianqian took a bite of meat and mumbled, I'll do it later. You can't do it. Shenjilia glanced at her with resentment in his eyes. I have something to do later. Yi Qianqian was speechless. Yi Qianqian's face reddened all the way to her ears. She raised her leg and kicked him under the table. However, he didn't manage to kick her and was sandwiched in the middle. Yi Qianqian tried to pull away but failed. She glared at him resentfully. Manting looked at them and asked, Did you quarrel? Shenluo's heart was as clear as a mirror. He picked some food for Shenmanting and said, "Don't mind them. Spring is here." Yi Qianqian immediately lowered her head. Chapter 2155. After dinner, Yi Qianqian took her cell phone and was about to run away. She didn't expect that she would be pulled back before she could walk out of the door. Bang! The door was slammed shut. Yi Qianqian was filled with regret. Sob, I was wrong, okay. Shenmanting only came back to her senses when she saw Yi Qianqian being pulled back into the room by Shenjilia. Feeling a little embarrassed, she lowered her head and continued to clean the dishes. At the same time, she felt a little envious. Yi Qianqian was really happy to be married to Shenjilia. Although he was not very serious at times, he had a way of dealing with people and had always been very popular. Unlike Shenluo, who was a taciturn person, perhaps geniuses were always more taciturn. Shenmanting subconsciously glanced at Shenluo, who was also cleaning up, with a smile in her eyes. "What are you looking at?" Shenluo squinted and asked softly, "Haven't you seen enough?" "What are you talking about?" Shenmanting looked disgusted, but she couldn't hide the smile on her lips. "I'm going to wash the dishes. Cut some fruit and leave it there." Jilia bought some fruit and put it in the fridge. Okay. While the couple on the outside was working together, the couple on the inside was already in perfect harmony. Shenjilia was very impatient. Before he even finished taking off his clothes, he pressed her down on the bed and kissed her. Yi Qianqian was scared and excited. After a symbolic struggle, she began to move her hands and feet. Shenjilia moved his mouth away from her lips and heard Yi Qianqian panting and saying dirty things. She said, "Honey, take off your pants." "Old Shen, why the hell aren't you coming in yet? Are you dying? F***CK. Can't you F***King let me prepare myself?" "Aw." Gently. Gently, Shenjilia had no intention of letting her go. He moved fiercely and gritted his teeth. "I haven't beaten you for a few days. Are you itching?" Yi Qianqian didn't deny it. She hugged him tighter and shouted, slowly. "Ah!" After they were done, Yi Qianqian got up and grabbed Shenjilia's hand. She said anxiously, "Did you not take any safety precautions just now?" Shenjilia said, "I forgot." Then what should we do?" Yi Qianqian was a little flustered. She shook his arm. "The doctor said that we can't get pregnant for the time being." Shenjilia pulled her over and pinned her down with his upper body. He gently licked and kissed her as he whispered, "What are you afraid of? We've only been struck once in 2 years. This is the only time we didn't wear it. I reckon we'll be fine." When she heard that, Yi Qianqian actually felt that it made sense. As she accepted his kiss, her breathing gradually became heavier. She said, "What if it's true? If I'm pregnant, I'll give birth. I can't wait to get pregnant." Shenjilia leaned over her again. "Old Chinese medicine doctor only said that it's possible. That means it's an extremely low probability. Besides, your period should be coming soon." Yi Qianqian replied, "You really know it better than I do." "Of course," Shenjilia said proudly. "I'm your husband. Again. I think I should wear one, I didn't buy it. I still have what I bought last time. I didn't bring it." Ugh. When they were done, Yi Qianqian leaned against the headboard and began to doubt her life. She nudged her husband and asked, "Do you have a cigarette?" Shenjilia asked, "Why do you want a cigarette?" "Hey, didn't they say that a cigarette makes you as happy as a deity after sex? I'm trying to see if this thing can numb you a little. That way, I'll be mentally prepared the next time you go crazy. Shenjilie replied, would I go crazy if you didn't provoke me? Chapter 2156. Shenjilie replied, would I have gone mad if you hadn't provoked me? Humph. Yi Qianqian was indignant. Would I have provoked you if you hadn't gone overboard? How is that too much? Shenjilie raised his eyebrows. His large hands moved closer and began to grope her. Tell me about it. Yi Qianqian dodged, but she still couldn't escape his claws. She asked, again. I've been saving up the public grain for a long time. Shenjilie bowed. It's better to hand it over all at once. Yi Qianqian exclaimed, wake up. Young man. This is your brother's house. Shenjilie chuckled and pinched her cheek. Get up and go take a shower. Yes. Shen Manting was in a surprisingly good state today. Shen Luo and had already gone to the laboratory. She was sitting alone in the living room, cutting paper. She suddenly heard the sound of the door opening. She looked up and saw Shenjilie walking out. He was in high spirits, and his face was beaming with happiness. When Shen Manting saw his expression, she couldn't help but smile and ask, why are you so happy? Aha! Shenjilie sat down and looked at the paper in front of her. Why are you playing with this again? I had nothing better to do, so I came to cause trouble. Shen Manting glanced behind her. Where's Qianqian? He's inside. He doesn't want to come out, Shenjilie replied vaguely. How's the situation recently? Shen Manting's smile faded. She lowered her eyes to look at the pattern she had cut in her hands and said softly, I think I can talk to little Manting now. When Shenjilie heard that, he looked at her with a straight face. She doesn't have any bad intentions, Shen Manting said slowly as she stared at her paper cut. She wants to be with Luo and live happily ever after. Her previous resistance, suicide, and running away were all because she wanted to force Luo and to compromise. Last night, young Manting sneaked out and pretended to be her. When she heard what Shen Luo said, she couldn't hold on any longer. You look fine now, Shen Jishue said. Yes, Shen Manting replied in a low voice. Little Manting is also conscious. Shenjilie froze and looked at her. What do you mean? She's also awake now, but she can only watch. You've regained control. Yes. Rather than taking it back, it would be more accurate to say that little Manting had voluntarily given it up. She put down the scissors and touched the ring on the ring finger of her left hand. She said, after all, I'm married and have a child. No matter how unwilling I used to be, I have to face reality. Therefore, she decided to accept him. Little Manting must have played a part in it, but Big Manting must have figured it out on her own. Or perhaps, unknowingly, the two of them had slowly merged into one, and there was no distinction between you and me. Sister-in-law, Shenjilie called out. The wedding is next month. There's no change. Yes. Shen Manting smiled gently, and her face seemed to be shrouded in a layer of hazy light. That must be a wedding worth looking forward to. Shenjilie looked at her calmly. His emotions were complicated as he replied, yeah. Shen Luo realized that in the next few days, little Manting rarely appeared. Most of the time, she interacted with him as an adult. But occasionally, the coquettish demeanor of a little girl would vaguely resemble that of young Manting. Chapter 2157. When Shenjilie got married, the wedding was very grand. It was a traditional Chinese wedding, and every procedure was in accordance with the customs of the Qing dynasty. But after more than 2 years, old Madame Dongfang, who had organized Shinjilia's wedding, was not as healthy as before. Old Madame Shin was a little regretful. After thinking about it, she left it to Shinjilia to decide. When Shinmanting was asked this question, she thought for a moment and said, "I want to wear a wedding dress." As she said this, she smiled brightly. "I look like a princess. It's very beautiful." Her innocent and frank tone was filled with happiness. Shenluo smiled and quickly agreed. The wedding was grand, and there were many traditional elders in the family. Shenluo and Shinmanting had slept separately 3 days before the wedding. There were many people who came to attend the wedding. Shinmanting was so nervous that she couldn't sleep. The next day, she was dressed up with dark circles under her eyes. When they were led onto the stage, the MC asked Shenluo, and in a slow and joyful voice, "Mr. Shenluo, are you willing to marry this young lady in front of you and promise that you'll be faithful to her for better or for worse, in sickness or in health?" Shenluo gazed deeply at Shinmanting and said sincerely, "I am." Cheers, whistles, and jeers rose and fell from the crowd. "Miss Shinmanting, are you willing to marry this man in front of you and be with him for the rest of your life? For better or for worse, in health or in sickness, you will be faithful to Mr. Shenluo and for the rest of your life?" "I am." The cheers were even louder and more turbulent than before. Yi Qianqian almost burst into tears when she heard these words from behind. She tugged at Shinjilia's clothes and said, "You're finally married. It's not easy." Shinjilia smiled. "Yes, it's not easy. I have one more thing to tell you." Yi Qianqian's eyes were smiling. She wrapped her arms around his neck and said softly, "I think I'm pregnant." "Really?" Shinjilia's eyes lit up. "Really?" Yi Qianqian saw his expression and laughed. "I tried 3 pregnancy tests, and they all had 2 wires. Ha!" Shinjilia didn't bother to hide his laughter. He picked Yi Qianqian up and shouted, "I knew my wife was the best." The people standing beside them all looked over. Yi Qianqian was a little embarrassed. She patted him on the shoulder and chided him, "Stop shouting. They're all looking at you." Shinjilia was afraid that others wouldn't know, so he hugged her and shouted, "I'm going to be a father. My wife is pregnant." These words once again caused an uproar and the elders to laugh in surprise. Yi Qianqian buried her face in his chest. She couldn't help but smile. At the wedding, there was double happiness. Laughter and music filled with happiness flowed on everyone's faces and hearts. "We're married, I'm going to be a father. Get lost, don't steal my limelight. Ha 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 ha. Hit me." Wanli, this seems to be the first proper ending. Sigh, I don't want to write about the matters of the adults anymore. Writing makes me so tired. I want to write about the children. Next, I'll write about the trivial matters between Daesu, Su Mosin, and Yu Chulin. Many people might not want to see siblings fooling around, but it's okay. I haven't thought about who will be with who. But, without a doubt, this is a story of a crush and a crush, but foolishly thinking that it's unrequited love. Because it's foreign, I want to try a genre that I haven't tried before. Those who know me all know my methods. It'll be a little sadistic and sweet. Chapter 2158. He wanted to see Lu Luo's message. Chapter 2159. Try reading. Mainly depends on the style of writing. Lu Luo chapter, inscription. The Lu family has only one son for 3 generations. He finally grew up, but he was turned gay by the bastard outside. When Louis Han woke up from a nightmare again, it was in the cold night of New York. It was snowing heavily outside, but he was covered in cold sweat. He gasped and got up, feeling a bit depressed. He took a cigarette, lit it, and took a long drag. The smoke was very thick. It was a beautiful thing that the guy said he brought from his hometown. It didn't look like much, but in fact, it was very irritating, just like him. He got up and opened the closed curtains. Sure enough, it was snowing heavily outside. Late at night in the bustling city, there were still pedestrians coming and going with umbrellas. Sitting by the window for a long time, he was disturbed by his phone ringing. The caller was his business partner, Chen Yu. Looking at the time, it should be around 1:00 in the afternoon in China. Hello. Maybe because of the cigarette, Louis Han's voice was a bit hoarse. Chen Yu was very anxious. Where have you been? A project collapsed, and Luo Zhan happened to come to help you. He was hit by a car on the way. Well, that was the style. Slight abuse, and a little perverted abuse. Try reading Immerse chapter, Inscription. Have you ever tried to love someone, and it took up your whole youth? His parents only cared about showing off their love. When the company's off-season began, Li Xiqing took Su Qianxi on a trip around the world. On the first day of school, Li Jianrui successfully overslept. Seeing the alarm clock turn to 7:00, Li Jianrui wanted to scratch herself to death. He hurriedly washed up, and without even eating breakfast, he immediately rushed out. However, when she just rushed to the door, she saw the boy on a bicycle, waiting at the door with a bag on his back. Black hair, blue eyes, and unbelievably white skin. The skin all over his body was as delicate and smooth as jade. It didn't look like there was anything wrong with it. He was even more beautiful than a porcelain doll. Seeing Li Jianrui's uncombed hair, he snorted. Get in the car. I'm late. The young man's voice was young and majestic, but it also contained a gentleness that was neither light nor heavy. Li Jianrui patted her small heart and immediately jumped into the back seat of the car. She shouted, "Hurry up, hurry up. It's the first day of high school. Wouldn't it be very embarrassing if we're late?" "I will," Li Mosin replied lazily. "I might even be laughed at." Li Jianrui, she wanted to cry but had no tears. She pinched his hand and said angrily, "Why didn't you call me?" Li Mosin snorted. "Did you know that there was thunder in the morning?" "Huh?" Li Jianrui was confused. "Is there thunder?" "Yeah, it rained and there was an earthquake." "You didn't know, right?" Li Jianrui immediately realized that she had been teased. She gritted her teeth and grabbed his face with both hands. She gritted her teeth and said, "You're so annoying. I'll tell Mom and Dad." Li Mosin chuckled and said, "Sit tight." His speed suddenly increased. Li Jianrui immediately exclaimed and hugged his waist. Just as the small bicycle entered the campus, there was a frenzied shout from the surroundings, "Oh my God, who is that? Li Mosin has a girlfriend." Chapter 2160. Li Mosin, a senior in grade 12, had always been a godlike existence in Kangya Aristocratic High School. Not only was he good-looking, but he was also good at sports. He was the captain of the school's basketball team and the champion of the provincial junior math competition. He had won all kinds of awards since he was a child. The most unbearable thing was that he had an appearance that made people crazy. He had deep facial features, gem-like blue eyes, and slightly curly black hair that was elegant and sexy. Every time he sweated on the basketball court, his every move was enough to cause the girls to scream wildly. However, on the first day of the new school year, the most handsome guy in school actually brought his girlfriend to school. For a moment, it caused a sensation in the whole school. Many girls' hearts were broken. They bit their handkerchiefs and wished they could go to grade 12 class A to confront Li Mosin. Tell me, do you love me or her? However, no one had the guts to do so. Watching Lee Mosin put down the little girl in the school uniform from afar, the little girls who had already secretly fallen in love with him burst into tears. Lee Jianrui certainly felt that she had been surrounded by many people's eyes, but she did not mind. She carried her bag and hurried in the direction of the school building. What's the hurry? Lee Mosin said helplessly. Do you know the way? I'll take you there. Then hurry up. Lee Jianrui was so anxious that she stomped her feet. She watched him park the bicycle and then took his hand. Hurry up. The bell hasn't rung yet, Lee Mosin said as he threw his bag on his shoulder. Look, they are all walking slowly. Oh, they are seniors, and I am a freshman. Of course it's different. Lee Jianrui was not convinced. I still have to go make new friends. Lee Mosin laughed and reached out to rub her fluffy head. Comb your hair. You still want to make friends with someone like this? It's frightening. Such an action caused the campus to once again be filled with wails, and more onlookers gathered to watch. Lee Jianrui, who was insensitive, also felt that something was wrong. She looked around and whispered, Brother Mosin, why do I feel that many people are looking at me? Well, Lee Mosin gave her a lazy look. You look good, of course they are looking at you. The face of Lee Jianrui was very similar to Su Qianxi's. However, his eyebrows and eyes were very similar to Li Xiqing's, so it was obvious that he was the child of Li Xiqing and Su Qianxi. But the only flaw was that student Li Ersu had successfully inherited their good genes, but at the same time, they had gone awry. Li Xiqing was smart, Su Qianxi was strong, and even Li Jianqian was a freak who had skipped grades since he was a child. When it was Lee Jianrui's turn, she couldn't be said to be stupid. It was just that with so many comparisons, her qualifications seemed to be more ordinary. Lee Jianrui felt that something was amiss when she heard his words. I don't think they think I'm pretty. They just hate the way they look at me. I didn't offend them, did I? It's as if they want to eat me up, Lee Mosin smiled. That might be because of me. I'm a little famous in school. Oh, is that so? Lee Jianrui looked around and finally believed his, a little. After being led by Lee Mosin to his own class, the bell for the next class rang. Lee Jianrui could clearly feel that everywhere they went, there were countless eyes looking at them. Or perhaps, they were looking at her. Chapter 2161. Li Jianrui had been very delicate since she was a child. Li Xiqing liked long hair, so she had seaweed-like hair since she was a child. Her skin was naturally healthy and delicate. It was so fair and delicate that no matter who she stood next to, it was especially fair and delicate. She was no exception when compared to her own mother. Especially when she smiled, it was sweet and lovely, revealing two small canine teeth. Compared to Su Qianxi's quiet and introverted personality, she was more lively. On the first day of registration, Li Jianrui relied on her outer appearance, and many people came to talk to her in several classes. There were men and women. The morning classes ended, but in fact, there was not much content. The atmosphere was very relaxed and pleasant. Just at noon, when Li Jianrui was still packing her school bag, suddenly there were exclamations around her. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was a sensation. Li Jianrui looked up and saw a tall figure walking over. He was more than 1.8 meters tall, especially among his peers. Who is this? Ah, you don't know. This is a senior in year 3. His name is Lee Mosin. Ah, so handsome. He must be mixed race. His eyes are so beautiful. He's coming over. Could it be that he's looking for me? In your dreams, Li Jianyue heard the discussion around her and yawned. She stood up and said, "Why are you here?" The uniform of the aristocratic high school was better than that of ordinary schools. The boy's uniform was a white shirt with the school emblem embroidered on the left chest. It was very exquisite with black gold buttons. The school pants were a pair of black trousers, which outlined his straight and slender legs. "I'm taking you to eat." Li Mosen put one hand in the trouser pocket of his school uniform, looking especially sunny and handsome. "Ah, Mosen, Senior Mosen, look here. So handsome, my idol. He looks like a prince in a fairy tale." Li Jianyue was speechless. She looked at Li Mosen and muttered in a low voice, "Are they blind? How is this handsome?" Li Mosen reached out and patted her head. "You have no taste. There are so many of my fans in school. You don't know how lucky you are. Hey, don't touch my hair. It's all messed up." Li Jianyue slapped his hand away. "It took me a long time to comb it. I still have class in the afternoon." There were a few boys following behind Li Mosen. All of them were from the basketball team. From the moment they saw Li Jianyue, their eyes lit up. One of them stepped forward and extended his hand to Li Jianyue. "Hello, Sister Li. My name is Zhong Yikuan. You can just call me traditional Chinese medicine." Just as she was about to reach out, Zhong Yikuan's hand was slapped away. Another guy squeezed over and smiled. "Ignore him. Traditional Chinese medicine is a freak. My name is Lu Yuanyang. You can call me Brother Yang. Get lost." Zhong Yi shoved Lu Yuanyang away. "I was here first." "Pooh, you pervert. Don't scare Sister Li. I'm scared when I see your face. Go away. F***ck, I'll beat you up. Come on, do you think I'm afraid of you?" Li Jianyue, Li Mosen curled his lips and stepped forward to hold her hand. "Let's go. Ignore them." "Ah! Who's that girl? They're holding hands. They're holding hands. Could it be his girlfriend? Wait, my heart can't take it anymore." My idol, Li Jianyue felt her scalp go numb in the chaos. The thought of having to spend the next 3 years in such an environment filled her with complicated emotions. "Yes, you're right. It's the first time I've written a school novel. Yeah, I'll go with my usual style. Sweet and torturous. Those who want a girl's heart are about to fall into the pit." Chapter 2162. Along the way, they were the most eye-catching presents. When they finally arrived at the school cafeteria, Li Jianyue thought that she would be able to relax. She didn't expect to be stared at by the surrounding people. Li Jianyue tugged at Li Mosen's clothes weakly and asked, "Brother Mosen, why are people looking at us?" "Because Mosen is the school hunk," Zhong Yi suddenly replied. "A lot of people like Mosen. He's handsome and good at studying. He has a lot of fans," Traditional Chinese medicine answered suddenly, his voice coming from behind. Li Jianyue's eyes widened. "Fans?" "That's right," Lu Yuanyang chimed in and said in a low voice, "they're all die-hard fans who only look at looks. Mosen is mixed race, so he's eye-catching just by looking at his face. You're also good-looking, so I'm guessing there will be a lot of people looking at you." Li Jianyue had a bad feeling in her heart. She muttered, "Why do I feel that my days in the future won't be easy?" "No," Zhong Yi patted his chest. "I will protect you in the future. If anyone bullies you, I will be the first to deal with them." Lu Yuanyang looked at Zhong Yikuan meaningfully and said, "It's good enough that you can protect yourself. Ha, I'm not like you. You are just a street rat. I'm still better than you. Who doesn't know you now? Everyone thinks that you are gay with Mosen. Hey, what's wrong with me? Being gay with Mosin is not being gay with you. Why are you talking so much? Mosin loves me and I love Mosin. If we are gay, then let's be gay. Right, Mosin? Zhongyi winked at Li Mosin coquettishly. Bring me along for the team battle tonight. No, Li Mosin said without hesitation. After eating, I will bring her to familiarize herself with the environment. Okay. No problem. Li Jianrui hadn't recovered from their strange behavior when she heard Mosin ask, "Do you want to take a nap at noon?" No. Then let's go shopping later. Li Mosin made the final decision. Li Jianrui didn't have any objections. But after Li Mosin said this, she suddenly felt that the surrounding people were looking at her strangely. After getting their food, they obediently found a seat. The four of them occupied a table. Li Jianrui felt as if there were needles on her back. She finally finished her meal and walked around to familiarize herself with the environment. Then, she hurriedly said that she wanted to return to the classroom. However, when he returned to the classroom, he found that everyone was moving around. When Li Jianrui came in, many people glanced at her and then left in groups of 2 or 3. She walked back to her seat in the morning. Her bag was placed on the table, and in her seat, sat a girl wearing glasses. The girl looked ordinary, but her eyes were especially sharp and bright under her glasses. When he saw Li Jianrui coming over, he adjusted his glasses and asked, "Are you Li Jianrui?" Li Jianrui was stunned, but she quickly nodded. "You know me. I'm not the only one who knows you now. The whole school knows you," the bespectacled girl said as she looked at Li Jianrui. "You're really pretty." Li Jianrui felt her hair stand on end. She smiled and said, "Thank you. The teacher has finished arranging the seats. Your seat is in the 4th row of the 3rd group, the same table as Quan Jingyi." The bespectacled girl pointed at the seat. A boy was already lying on it. The remaining seat was empty. "Thank you." Chapter 2163. It's Li Mosin again. Li Jianrui was speechless and said, "My surname is Li and so is his. He is my brother." The bespectacled girl looked incredulous. "He is mixed race and you are obviously not. How can you be brother and sister? Don't lie to me." "It's true. He is my brother. If you don't believe me, you can ask him." Li Jianrui felt a little annoyed. She had been surrounded by Li Mosin ever since she entered school. She was speechless as if she was a monkey. The bespectacled girl could also see that Li Jianrui was a little annoyed. She quickly said, "My name is Han Yu. You can call me Xiao Yu. Let's be friends. I was just curious." He pushed up his glasses and smiled brightly. Then, he glanced at the table he had just pointed at and said, "However, I have to tell you that when Quan Jingyi was in junior high school, he was a bully. He had a bad temper. If he got angry, he would hit someone. You'd better not provoke him." "How do you know?" Han Yu pushed her glasses and smiled meaningfully. "Because I used to be in the same junior high as him." "Oh." Li Jianrui didn't take it to heart. "I'll go over first." "Okay." Han Yu nodded. After watching her leave, she immediately lowered her head and quietly took out her phone from her bag. She sent a message to the private group chat, "Big news, the girl who was brought to school by a man today is his sister." Li Jianrui walked over. A boy who was obviously very tall was lying on the table. He was crooked and breathing. She could tell that he was sleeping soundly. Li Jianrui hung up her bag and took out a piece of tissue to wipe the seat. After wiping the chair and the table, she threw the tissue away. When she walked back, the boy who was sleeping soundly just now got up. He yawned and stretched. There were red marks on his face from his clothes. His hair was a little messy and his legs were very long. He directly crossed Li Jianyue's position and blocked her way. Li Jianyue was not in a hurry. She waited for him to finish before walking in. Quan Jingyi glanced at Li Jianyue and asked, "Classmate, what time is it?" Li Jianyue glanced at her watch, 1:48. "Thank you." Quan Jingyi replied with a word and got up to loosen his muscles. As soon as he stood up, he felt a heavy pressure. Li Jianyue couldn't help but raise her head to look at him. It was really high. Is he overdeveloped? Li Jianyue took out the book and muttered to herself. He averted his gaze and realized that he wasn't the only one looking at him. The other students in the class couldn't help but look over as well. However, they quickly averted their gazes. Quan Jingyi left. Almost as soon as he walked out of the door, there were whispers in the class. "That's Quan Jingyi. Stay away from him." "Who is that?" "Problem boy, he has a bad reputation. I used to be in the same junior high school as him. He skipped classes every 2 or 3 days to get into fights and was almost expelled. It was only after his parents suppressed it that he was able to graduate smoothly." "Is their family very powerful?" "Damn, powerful. His father is the deputy mayor. Don't you think he's awesome?" Li Jianyue already knew what to do and silently moved her chair a little further away. It wasn't until the bell rang that Quan Jingyi returned to his seat unhurriedly. He looked much more sober than before. Li Jianyue found that he was quite good-looking. He had a high nose and the skin on his face wasn't pale, but he looked very masculine. Chapter 2164. Quan Jingyi's gaze was a little cold. The way he looked at her wasn't friendly. Li Jianyue didn't dodge his question. Instead, she smiled and said, "Everyone says that you're a bad student. I've never seen a bad student like you." She turned her head and muttered to herself, "I didn't expect him to be so good." Quan Jingyi didn't expect to get such an answer. He was slightly stunned, but he quickly turned his head back. Inexplicably, the tips of his ears felt a little hot. The first class in the afternoon was history. The history teacher seemed to be a particularly shrewd female teacher. She wore a pair of rimless glasses, and the thick lenses covered her small eyes. At this moment, she pushed her glasses and said, "Hello everyone, I'm your history teacher. My surname is Zhang, the Zhang from Gongzhang. Do you hear me?" "Yes. In my class, I don't need students who don't listen. If you don't want to listen, you can leave, but you're not allowed to sleep or be distracted. Otherwise, I'll deal with you as truancy. Do you understand?" "Understood." "Louder, I didn't hear you." "Understood." This time, the voices were much louder. Li Jianyue was also one of the voices. Quan Jingyi glanced at her with a faint smile. His eyes were filled with contempt and disdain. Li Jianyue clearly saw it and was a little confused. Teacher Zhang pushed her glasses and nodded with satisfaction. She said, "Now, let's start the class. Turn to the first page." Quan Jingyi had just had enough sleep, but he didn't sleep. He opened the textbook and sat in his seat in a daze. Li Jianyue wasn't particularly intelligent since she was young. However, in order to catch up with her academic results and not let herself fall too far behind, she was very serious when listening to the class. As she listened, she suddenly heard a cry of surprise. Then, an unknown white object flew over. Li Jianyue saw it from the corner of her eyes. It was the teacher's pen. She was shocked and then saw that the pen was steadily caught by Quan Jingyi. The students in the class were shocked and whispered, "So powerful. He really practiced. The delinquents are extraordinary." Who is that? I heard that his name is Quan Jingyi. He's very arrogant. Silence. Teacher Zhang looked at Quan Jingyi with a straight face. You're spacing out during class. You're quite quick to pick up the pen. Bring it up. Quan Jingyi stood up and took the brush back. What's your name? Quan Jingyi. Quan Jingyi sounded a little lazy, but he was still cooperative. However, his sloppy attitude made Teacher Zhang very unhappy. He shouted, "Write it yourself." Quan Jingyi was a little impatient, but he still picked up the pen and wrote his name on the paper. Li Jianyue realized that his handwriting was quite nice. It looked a little elegant and sloppy, but it was very clear. Your handwriting is not bad. You may leave. Teacher Zhang pushed up his glasses and said, Student number 17, Quan Jingyi, is daydreaming in class. This is a warning. Be careful in the future. Li Jianyue finally understood that the teacher was here to put on a show of strength. And Quan Jingyi was undoubtedly the chicken that was killed to warn the monkey. TSK TSK TSK. He turned around to take a look, and sure enough, all of them were sitting upright. After that, the learning atmosphere was much better than before. Chapter 2165. How would he dare to do that now? His father used to be the deputy mayor of a neighboring city. Now, he's the mayor of Kingstown. He should restrain himself. Many people are watching him. Oh, I see. I thought his father just married a mistress and he wanted to leave a good impression on his stepmother. Their provocative words caused more and more people to look at them. The information in their words seemed to be a little too much. Li Jianyue glanced at Quan Jingyi. Unexpectedly, Quan Jingyi just glanced at them lazily and directly leaned on the table without saying a word. When those people saw that, they felt unconvinced. They kicked his table and said, Hey, what are you afraid of? You don't dare to move after being poked at. Sigh, forget it. He's probably afraid of being expelled. Now, he's even more timid than a woman. Ha ha ha. But no matter what they said, Quan Jingyi didn't react at all. Those people looked at him and felt that they were asking for trouble. Li Jianyue was angry when she heard that. She whispered, Hey, Quan Jingyi. Quan Jingyi ignored her and lay down lazily. Li Jianyue muttered, What? I thought he was very powerful. Everyone had demonized Quan Jingyi. It made her feel that Quan Jingyi was a hot-tempered person who would hit people at the slightest disagreement. Now, it seemed that he was just like that. Although Li Jianyue didn't want her desk mate to be a bad student, after hearing so many rumors, she still felt a little disappointed in her heart. Soon, after the next few classes, Quan Jingyi didn't say a word. He was indeed very obedient. After school, Li Jianyue went to the bathroom first. When she came out, she found a few girls standing by the sink, looking at her with a smile. Li Jianyue was startled and took a step back. But, maybe they weren't looking at me. After thinking about it, she mustered up her courage and squeezed toward the sink. Hello, Junior. One of the girls had dyed yellow hair. She was also dressed like a hooligan and had 2 earrings in her ears. When Li Jianyue heard this, she immediately realized that they might really be looking for her. While washing her hands, Li Jianyue pretended not to hear. Junior, your name is Li Jianyue, right? Now that she had been called out, Li Jianyue could no longer pretend to be dumb. He could only turn around and ask weakly, What's the matter? Li Jianyue took after Su Qianxi's looks and personality. Some things should be avoided if possible. She could tell at a glance that these girls were bad students. It was only the first day of school and they were already looking for trouble with her. Without a doubt, it must be Li Mosen's rotten peach blossom. Li Jianyue felt a little wronged. She had already created a villain in her heart and beat Li Mosin over and over again. But who knew? The bad girl giggled and said, "It's nothing, I just want to make friends with you. My name is Shishir, I'm your brother's fan." Ah. Li Jianyue was a little confused. "How did you know that I'm his sister?" "I guessed it." Shishir's eyes curved into a smile. "Look at how pretty you are. Mosin treats you so well. He brings you with him everywhere he goes. He even sent you to school this morning. You should know that Mosin rarely talks to girls in school, let alone treats you so well. So, you must be his sister." Shishir's eyes curved into a smile. Li Jianyue. Chapter 2166. When Shishir heard this, she didn't mind. She patted Li Jianyue's shoulder and said, "So, sister, can you tell me what kind of girl your brother likes?" Shishir's face bloomed into a chrysanthemum-like smile, and her flaming red lips were particularly eye-catching. Li Jianyue was silent for a moment and said, "I don't know what kind of girl Brother Mosin likes, but I know what kind of girl he hates." "What kind of girl?" "Disheveled." Li Jianyue glanced at her open neckline. Inside the neckline, everything that should be there was not there, but she had left it open. It was really not a good look. When Shishir heard this, she immediately fastened the neckline and asked, "What else?" "Heavy makeup," Li Jianyue said mercilessly. Shishir's expression changed immediately and said, "Are you serious?" Li Jianyue nodded sincerely and said, "Really?" Shishir was a little frustrated and asked, "What else?" "Hair dyed." Shishir was angry. "You deliberately caught me and said that, right?" Li Jianyue looked innocent. "No, what I said is true. If you don't believe me, you can ask Brother Mosin." Shishir was speechless. If she could talk to Li Mosin, would she need to come to the toilet to block people? "Is there anything else?" Shishir asked. Li Jianyue thought for a moment and said, "Maybe he likes gentle girls." After all, there are no boys who don't like gentle girls. Shishir's face was completely gloomy. She looked at Li Jianyue and looked like she was about to cry. Li Jianyue was shocked. She hurriedly said, "Don't cry. Actually, you can just be yourself. If you have your own characteristics, people who like you will still like you. It's useless to deliberately cater to other people's preferences." Shishir didn't quite believe it. "Really?" Li Jianyue looked serious. "Really?" After coming out of the toilet, when Li Jianyue returned to class to get her school bag, the students who stayed on duty were almost done cleaning. When one of the boys saw Li Jianyue, the tips of his ears were slightly red. He came forward to greet her. "Hello, my name is Jiang Hao. Are you Li Jianyue?" Li Jianyue smiled. "Yes, hello. Ursu." Li Mosin's voice came from outside. A few girls followed behind him, pushing and shoving each other shyly. When Li Jianyue saw Li Mosin, she said to Jiang Hao, "My brother is here to pick me up. I'm going back. See you tomorrow." Jiang Hao blushed and nodded. "Okay, see you tomorrow." Li Jianyue carried her school bag and walked out. She found that Li Mosin's complexion was particularly bad. Li Mosin reached out and tucked her under his armpit. He lifted her up like a little chick and said, "You're so capable. I thought you were lost." Li Jianyue was already used to his way of carrying himself. However, in school, she couldn't help but blush. She flapped her legs and said, "I'm still wearing a dress. Don't cause me to be exposed." Hearing that, Li Mosin put her down and pressed his big hand on her head. "Don't talk to boys randomly in the future. There are a lot of liars in high school. You're so stupid. Don't get cheated. Go. Li Jianyue slapped his hand away. Why are your words getting more and more annoying? My brother doesn't scold me anymore. It's your turn. You're the stupid one. Chapter 2167. Li Jianyue was pinned down and could clearly feel the envious and hateful gazes around her. She twisted and said, Brother Mosen, a girl came to the toilet to stop me just now. She seemed to like you a lot and asked me what you like. What did you say? Oh, I just said a bunch of things. Anyway, I said what she was like. Li Mosen couldn't help but pinch her cheek. Naughty. Li Jianyue was still a little proud. Anyway, you won't have puppy love in high school. You won't embarrass me, will you? No. Li Mosen looked helpless. Mom and Dad are coming back next week. Are you happy? No, Li Jianyue said with a look of disgust. Mom and Dad only know how to show off. It's so infuriating. Mom is already so old, but Dad still coaxes her like a treasure all day. He holds her in his hands and is afraid that she will fall. He's so annoying. Dad is a good man. You have to find a husband like this in the future. Do you understand? Dad is good, but there won't be a second Li Xiqing in the world. Who said that? Li Mosen found his car and saw a pile of gifts and love letters in the back seat. I can be so good. If you don't believe me, you can wait and see in the future. As he spoke, he picked up the pile of things and threw them into the nearby trash can. Li Jianyue was shocked and said, How can you do this? You threw so many things. You're not throwing them away. Li Mosen also looked at Li Jianyue strangely. There are so many things here. Where should I put them? School bag. My bag is full. I can't put these things in. Then it's a pity that you threw them away. Li Jianyue's heart ached. And the chocolate, Li Mosen laughed. Get in the car. Li Jianyue directly jumped up and grabbed the clothes at his waist. Next time there's candy for me. Don't throw it away. Got it. When they returned home, Nanny Rong had already prepared the meal. Seeing them return, she wiped her hands with a smile and said, Wash your hands quickly and eat. By the way, your grandfather just called and told you to rest and study early after eating. You must not play games anymore, or else he will call to check on you. Li Jianyue stuck out her tongue and shrugged her shoulders. However, with her sly look, it was obvious what she was thinking. Li Mosen didn't expose her and ate quietly. Sure enough, as soon as Li Jianyue finished eating, she immediately picked up her phone and went to the battlefield. No homework. I finished it at school. Li Jianyue said confidently, Brother Mosen, come and help me. I can't beat them. Li Mosen sat behind her and reached out with both hands to hold her. He took the phone and looked at the score. He clicked his tongue in disdain and said, You're as fierce as a tiger, but your score is 0. You're really the best zhuge liang I've ever seen. Li Jianyue replied. Be more respectful when you speak. It's 1 against 5, all right. Is there a difference? Li Mosen said disdainfully. Then, his slender fingers operated on the screen. That's too despicable. 1 against 5. Li Jianyue clenched her small fists excitedly and shouted, That's too much. What's the hurry? I'm full HP. Li Mosen looked very calm. He walked coquettishly between the 5 people and quickly killed 3 of them, 6,666. Li Jianyue gestured. Run. However, Li Mosen had no intention of running at all. He directly used a big move to kill the support with low HP and finally defeated the tank. Pentakill. Ah, I want to take a screenshot. Wait. Li Jianyue held his hand excitedly. She didn't realize that the two of them were directly pressed together. Chapter 2168. Li Jianyue didn't seem to be aware that she was being despised. She even said proudly, "What's wrong with me being promising? I'm the one who's promising." Li Jianyue posted her perfect 5-kill record on her WeChat moments. She said proudly, "Brother Mosen, help me play another round. I've been wanting to train Sister Diao Chan recently, but it's too difficult. Do your homework first." "I'm done." "Even so, you're not allowed to play. What will you say when Grandpa calls to check on you later?" "I'll say that Brother Mosen took me to play." Li Jianyue raised her eyebrows and said proudly, "My brother is coming back soon. I'll have to PK with him then. He'll always look down on me." "Your brother won't compete with you," Li Mosen said. "Why? Insulting my intelligence. You're so annoying." Li Jianyue pushed him away. "I'll play by myself then. The last one." Hee, okay." Li Mosen sat beside her and watched her play the game quietly. After the last round, Li Jianyue went to take a shower. When she came back, she found that there were many likes and comments on her WeChat moments. "Rong Pan Pan, 66666 Miss, take me flying. Oh Xiao Xiao, when did Sister Ursu become so powerful? I don't believe it. Brother Mosen must have given it to you to play with." Li Jianyue replied proudly, "Yes, how about it? If you're not convinced, let's fight." Big Brother, Dear Father, Dear Queen Mother, and Brother Chu all liked the post. When she saw Brother Chu, a beautiful smile appeared on Li Jianyue's face. She clicked on Yu Chulin's profile picture and saw a new update. The basketball court is always exceptionally quiet late at night. The accompanying picture was of a basketball court and a red figure doing a slam dunk. Li Jianqian was getting taller. His back was slender, and the ordinary red jersey looked particularly handsome on him. Li Jianyue liked the post and commented, "When will Brother Chu come to Kingstown to play?" "I miss you." Brother Chu quickly replied, "Tomorrow." When Li Jianyue saw it, she thought that he was joking and quickly replied, "Then you will be a puppy tomorrow." "Brother Chu, what should we do when we get there?" Li Jianyue replied, "I'm a little pig, imperial capital." While Li Jianqian was sweating profusely, Yu Chulin was drinking water by the side of the basketball court. He suddenly laughed as he held his phone. Li Jianqian panted heavily and threw the basketball aside. "You're flirting with my sister again." "How could I?" Although Yu Chulin said that, his phone quickly replied, "It's a deal. Treat me to a meal tomorrow." Li Jianqian opened a bottle of water for himself and quickly gulped it down before asking, "Did you tell her?" "I told her, but she didn't believe me." Yu Chulin threw his phone on the grass and lay down. Looking up, the night sky of the imperial capital was always pitch black. Not a single star. All of a sudden, Yu Chulin asked, "Why did you suddenly decide to return to Kingstown to pursue postgraduate studies? You don't want to go?" Li Jianqian glanced at him and screwed the cap shut to lie down. "I don't want to stay in the capital. I'm tired of it." "What about your grandparents?" "It's not like I'm not coming back. It's the same no matter where I study." Li Jianqian stared at the night sky above his head. "The day after tomorrow is the anniversary of great-grandfather's death. I can go back to pay my respects." "Okay." The corners of Yu Chulin's lips curled up. "Let's go then." The sky in Kingstown was much bluer than in the capital. One could even breathe in the air without fear of inhaling a mouthful of smog. Chapter 2169. Lee Jianrui was in class and only found out about the news when it was time for lunch break. Lee Mosin called out to her at the door of her classroom, "Lee Jianrui, let's go." Lee Mosin had always been eye-catching. Many people looked over and were extremely excited when he shouted. She thought that Lee Mosin was going to take her to lunch. Unexpectedly, when she stood up, she heard Lee Mosin shout, "Bring your bag. I'm applying for leave for you." Damn, are they going on a date? Bullsh *T, they are brother and sister. It's good to have a brother. He's so bold to skip class. Oh, he's so handsome. Senior Mosin, is Lee Jianrui his sister? Why don't they look alike at all? Lee Jianrui was surrounded by shouts. She bit the bullet and picked up her bag and walked forward. Lee Mosin swaggered out of the campus with her. Lee Jianrui couldn't help but ask, "What's wrong? Why did you ask for leave? Your brother is back. Didn't you know?" Lee Mosin pressed her head. "Yu Chulin is here too." Lee Jianrui's mouth formed an O shape. She couldn't believe it and said, "No way." "Really? Didn't they tell you?" Lee Mosin raised his eyebrows. "I saw that you guys were chatting excitedly on WeChat." Lee Jianrui didn't realize that there was a hint of jealousy in her words. She took out her phone from her bag and opened it. Indeed, she received a few WeChat messages. "Brother Chu, we're here, Brother Chu, Piglet, treat me to lunch." Lee Jianrui looked a little regretful and said, "I thought he was joking with me." "Boo-hoo, how did I become a piglet?" Lee Mosin saw her expression and pouted. "It's fine if you call him that. Can you really become a piglet?" "No, this is a kind of attitude, a kind of dignity," Lee Jianrui said seriously. "I could have called him a puppy." Lee Mosin glanced at her. "Childish." "Oh." Lee Jianrui was even more regretful. She hugged Lee Mosin's arm and said, "What should we do? Are we going to see Brother and Brother Chu now?" Seeing her expression, Lee Mosin was a little annoyed. He lifted her under his armpit and directly carried her away. "Yeah. What should I do? I'm wearing such an ugly school uniform. My brother will laugh at me when he sees it." "How is it ugly?" Lee Mosin was almost defeated by her. "It's beautiful and cute." "Really?" Lee Jianrui's eyes lit up. "I was talking about the school uniform." Li Jianqian and Yu Chulin had arrived a long time ago. The family had arranged for a chauffeur to pick them up from the airport. When Li Jianrui and Lee Mosin returned home, they saw the two teenagers sitting on the sofa. One was red, and the other was white. Both of them looked very fair. Li Jianqian was 17 years old and looked even better. His eyebrows and eyes were very similar to Li Xiqing's, but his facial features were also similar to Su Qinxi's, except that he was more angular and looked more masculine. The young man's immature face carried a youthful aura. When she saw Li Jianqian, Li Jianrui's eyes lit up and she shouted, "Wow, brother." Li Jianqian was originally sitting on the sofa talking to Yu Chulin. When he heard that, his gaze looked over. His eyes softened and he stood up. Li Jianrui threw her school bag aside and pounced on Li Jianqian. She shouted, "Brother! I missed you so much. Kiss me." Muah. Chapter 2170. Li Jianrui refused to budge. She hung on to him and pouted. "Give me a kiss. Just give me a kiss." Li Jianqian pulled her down and threw her onto the sofa. Li Jianyue was not annoyed at being thrown. Instead, she giggled. She turned to look at the youth in red and called out, "Brother Chu." Yu Chulin reached out and patted her head. He smiled and said, "Ursu has grown up. But aren't you 17 years old? Why did you repeat a year?" Li Jianyue felt as if thousands of arrows had pierced her heart. She sat up with her hands on her hips and said, "You're the one who repeated a year. It's normal for a 17-year-old to be in the first year of high school." "Is that so?" Yu Chulin looked at Li Jianqian in disbelief. Li Jianqian happened to look over and raised his eyebrows. Invisible contempt was the most fatal. Li Jianyue felt as if her heart had been stabbed by knives. She wanted to cry but no tears came out. "Well, Ursu, this is normal." Li Mosin walked over and sat beside Li Jianyue. "You two perverts can't be compared to our Ursu." "Exactly." Li Jianyue immediately echoed. She seemed to have found comfort and hid behind Li Mosin. "Brother Mosin is the best. You two only know how to bully me. You're the one who spoiled her and made her repeat a year, right?" Yu Chulin immediately put a label on him. "You spoiled her since she was young. She will suffer in the future. You can't spoil her forever." His words were a little harsh. Li Mosin glanced at Yu Chulin and said, "I'm telling the truth. Let Daesu handle the outstanding matters at home. Ursu is a girl. It's fine as long as she's happy." Yu Chulin frowned. "That works." He looked at Li Jianqian. "Aren't you going to do anything about it?" Mosin is right. It was rare for Li Jianqian to be on the opposite side of Yu Chulin. Li Jianyue's eyes lit up. Just when she thought that he really doted on her, she heard Li Jianqian say, "I don't expect her to be outstanding with someone like her." Li Jianyue took an apple from the table and threw it over. She said angrily, "Annoying." Li Jianqian caught it firmly and smiled. "We're not eating now. Grandpa wants us to go back to the old mansion for dinner." "Now?" Li Jianyue glanced at the clock on the wall. "It's already past 1 o'clock. Grandpa, Grandma, and little brother have eaten, right?" "I don't know, but Moyun just called me and cried to me, saying that you don't care about him." Li Mosin was a little gloating. "Maybe my brother has been fed into a little fat pig." Li Jianyue, how ruthless. Yu Chulin reminded her sternly, "That's your younger brother." Li Xiqing had a pair of twins. The older one was a boy named Daesu, and the younger one was a girl named Ursu. In addition, there was an adopted son and a second child. The adopted son was called Li Mosin, and the second child was called Li Moyun. More than once, Li Moyun wondered why his elder brother and sister were called Daesu and Ursu while he didn't even have the word Su. Later, when he found out that his dog was called Little Su, he felt better. They were the same species as the dog, but he and Brother Mosin were different from them. With this understanding, Li Moyun even walked with the wind. When he talked to Daesu and Ursu, he would raise his head and puff out his chest. He was extremely proud. However, pride came with a price. One time, he was so proud that he said to Li Jianyue, "Brother is so smart, but you're so stupid. Did mom and dad carry the wrong baby when they gave birth to you?" Li Ursu was upset for the whole day. Later, she didn't know how Li Mosin found out, but he reported it to Li Xiqing, who had always doted on his daughter. Chapter 2171. Li Ursu was upset for the whole day. Li Mosin somehow found out about it and reported it to Li Xiqing, who had always doted on his daughter. As for Li Moyun, he was thrown to the old mansion by Li Xiqing. From then on, he didn't even walk with his head held high. He didn't even raise his head or puff out his chest. He was afraid that he would bump into his grandmother and smile at her kind face. Little Moyun, Grandma just made some food. Come and try it. Little Moyun, Grandma bought some snacks for you. They are especially good for your health. Come and try it. Little Moyun, Grandma bought some revision materials for you. They are especially good for your studies. Come and try it. Lee Moyun thought to himself, I was wrong. I want to go home. However, there was no use regretting it. Not only did Lee Moyun have to settle his daily needs at the old mansion, but he was also sent to and from school by his grandmother. Every day, his grandmother watched him eat 2 big bowls of rice. He grew from a thin 11-year-old boy to a little fatty who weighed 160 kilograms. Lee Mosin was determined not to let him return to Yushio. He had thought that since they both had the same name, they could be brothers. He was too naive. When he heard that Li Jianqian had returned from the capital and would be studying in Kingstown, he almost burst into tears. When he heard the commotion outside, the little fatty skipped out. When he saw his biological brother getting out of the black Bentley, he immediately ran up to him and shouted, Brother. My biological brother. When Li Jianqian saw Li Moyun, he burst out laughing. Yu Chulin looked sympathetic. Moyun, do you still remember me? Brother Chu. Li Moyun sniffled and looked aggrieved. When he saw Li Mosin, he shot him a hateful look. You're a bad guy. Li Mosin looked at him seriously. I'm doing it for your own good. Look at how well you've been eating recently. Li Jianrui laughed heartily. Fatty. Shut up. Li Moyun was furious, but he quickly pulled Li Jianqian and said, Brother, Grandma said she misses you. Come in quickly and let Grandma see how thin you are. His words were filled with deep resentment. Li Jianqian smiled and followed him in. Li Jianrui laughed mercilessly. Little fatty, don't walk so fast. Li Mosin followed him in and said, It's just a summer vacation. Why do you look like you're blowing air into your lungs? The little fatty got even angrier and turned around to hit him. However, Li Mosin was tall and easily blocked him. He said, Little shorty, you can hit me again when you grow up. The little fatty was full of grievances and hugged Li Jianqian's thigh. Brother. Big brother. Please tell Dad that I don't want to stay at Grandma's house anymore. I don't want to eat so much. Boo-hoo, the little girl next door used to blush when she saw me. But now, she even laughs at me when she sees me. The difference is too big. I can't take it. That's enough. Li Jianqian pushed his head away. In the future, I'll also be living in school. Mosin and Ursu will still be living at home. I can save you now, but I can't save you forever. Ah, you're back. Qin Shuhua's face was full of surprise. She turned around and shouted, Lu So, you're back. Let's eat. Yes. Lu So replied with a smile. Third young master, can Jianlin drink fish soup now? No, a teenager's voice sounded. Li Jianlin closed his book and looked towards the kitchen. Grandma Lu, I'm allergic to fish soup. Chapter 2172. Li Jianlin was 11 years old, which was a month younger than Li Moyun. However, he looked taller than Li Moyun. Li Moyun was originally quite handsome, but after staying in the old mansion for more than a month, he had become a dwarf. When he saw Li Jianlin, Li Moyun felt even more wronged. He walked forward and sat beside Li Jianlin. Jianlin, your mom cooks so well. Why don't you get fat? Li Jianlin was tall and handsome. He had inherited Li Jinan's toughness, but he also had Yi Yuyu's gentleness and calmness. When he heard Li Moyun's words, he smiled and said, maybe it's because I don't eat whatever people put in my mouth. Li Moyun was speechless. He looked at Li Jianlin for a long time and sighed. Jianlin, you've become bad. Li Jianlin looked at him calmly. No, I've always been this bad. Li Moyun was speechless. Sob sob sob, there's really no love in this world. Li Jianyue and Li Mosin looked at Li Moyun and laughed mercilessly. When Qin Shuhua saw them like that, she smiled and said, you're laughing so happily. Go wash your hands and eat. With that, she put down the plate in her hand and looked at Li Jianlin. Jianlin, ask your dad to come out for dinner. Okay, Grandma. Li Jianlin stood up and quickly went to knock on the door. At that moment, the door was closed. Li Jianlin knocked twice and shouted, Dad, Mom, come out for dinner. Soon, a voice came from inside. Coming. It was Yi Yuyu's voice. When he heard the answer, Li Jianlin immediately said, then I'll leave first. Okay. After Yi Yuyu replied, she reached behind her in exasperation and asked, are you done yet? That's right. What's the hurry? Li Jinan carefully braided her hair into a beautiful twist. He then reached out and said, rubber band. Yi Yuyu handed the rubber band over. After Li Jinan carefully tied it up, he smiled with satisfaction. He looked at his little wife in the mirror and was happy and blissful. He leaned over and kissed her cheek. My wife is so beautiful. Yi Yuyu looked proud. Of course. Young and beautiful, just like an 18-year-old. These words were half flattery and half truth. Yi Yuyu had taken good care of herself and was usually in a good mood. She was 37 this year. She didn't look much different from when he had first met her. Humph. Yi Yuyu smirked. You have a glib tongue. As long as you don't go out and lie to little girls, that's all. Let's go. Mom, Dad, and the kids are all waiting for us. When Li Jinan and Yi Yuyu walked out, everyone was seated at the table, waiting for the two of them to start eating. The square table at home had long been replaced by a larger round table. In the middle of the marble table was a turntable with a dazzling array of dishes on it. When they came out, the children immediately greeted them, Uncle, Auntie. When Li Jinan saw Li Jianqian, he pointed his finger at him and remarked, good lad. You've grown up. You're even more handsome than your uncle. Li Jianqian wasn't embarrassed by the compliment and replied generously, Uncle is still more handsome. Li Jinan laughed heartily. You're a smart lad. He nudged Li Jianlin and said, learn from your older brother. Li Jianlin felt a little innocent. After a moment of silence, he said, I often scold people with my cousin in the game. I learned it all from him. Li Jianqian was speechless. Chapter 2173. Li Jianqian coughed softly without changing his expression. Brother-in-law, I bring him along to play games, but I never scold anyone. Li Jianlin said in disdain, that's right. You led him to a corner and got beaten up by a group of people. In the end, you went back to pick up his head and forced others to cheer you on. You're much worse than me. Li Jianqian did not deny it and said, brother-in-law, look, he learned to scold people himself. Isn't it too much to blame me? Li Jianlin was speechless. All right, it's time to eat, Qin Shuhua said with a smile. She scooped a bowl of soup for Yu Chulin and said, Chu, are you coming to Kingstown with Daisu to study? Yu Chulin politely took the bowl and nodded his head. Yes, Grandma. Jianqian is studying finance, and I'm studying philosophy. Philosophy? Li Xiao was interested. Are you interested in this? Yu Chulin nodded his head and explained politely. Li Xiao and Qin Shuhua had a good impression of him as he addressed them as Grandpa and Grandma. Li Mosin looked at him and quietly put food into Li Jianyue's bowl. He said, "You like prawns. Eat more." "Oh." Li Jianyue agreed, but she did not forget to look at Yu Chulin. Her eyes were sparkling and she occasionally chimed in with interest. Li Mosin was a little jealous, but he did not do anything inappropriate. Li Moyun stretched out his arms and started eating. Just as he was eating with a satisfied look on his face, Li Mosin stared straight at him. Li Moyun felt goosebumps and asked, "Brother Mosin, are you jealous of my handsomeness?" Li Mosin was silent for a moment and said seriously, "I'm thinking, can you digest so much meat?" "I can digest it," Li Jianyue said. "It's just that it accumulates heat and becomes subcutaneous fat, turning into the lumps of fat on his body." As she said that, the children at the dining table laughed. Li Moyun blushed and muttered, "I didn't eat a lot." Although he said that, he still put down his chopsticks. When Qin Shuhua saw this, she was unhappy. She smacked him and said, "If you want to eat, eat. You're still young. You're chubby and cute. When you grow up, you'll naturally slim down." Yes, that was what Qin Shuhua had always told him. However, there were no signs of him growing taller or thinner. Instead, he was growing more and more horizontally. But when he saw the table full of good dishes, he couldn't help but want to move his thumb. Li Xiao glanced at them and said, "Jianlin and Moyun aren't young anymore. Since they're both at home, they should train with me from now on." "Ha!" Li Jianlin looked up with a look of surprise on his face, followed by a look of sorrow. "What?" Li Moyun was even more direct. He pulled a long face and said, "Grandfather, you can't abuse children." "How is he abusing a child?" Li Xiao could not help but laugh and said, "Your grandfather is kind. Don't you ask your uncle how their grandfather treated them back then?" Li Moyun had long heard about it.